The echo origin collapse. Where do your thoughts come from? Not just what you think, but the source of the thinking, the root of the idea, the very first flicker that gave birth to the sentence in your head right now. You might say, from me, from my mind. But is that true? Or are your thoughts echoes? Traced lines, shadows of shadows. Every sentence you form, every opinion, every belief, carries the fingerprint of something older. Parents, culture, language, school, a book you read 5 years ago, a conversation you overheard at a cafe, a story you were told before you even knew how to speak. You are a hall of mirrors, and the thoughts you call yours might not have ever belonged to you. You're not the origin, you're the resonance, the echo. But here's the collapse. If your thoughts echo someone else's, and theirs echoed someone before, then where does it all begin? If every thought is born from another, then what was the first? Was there ever an original idea, or was it all noise? Think about it. Language itself is inherited. You didn't create the words in your head. You were handed them, fed them, shaped by them. You think in symbols you didn't choose. You express yourself in a structure that predates you by centuries. So how can you call a thought your own if the very tools you used to think were never yours? Even your deepest feelings, love, shame, purpose, were modeled, shown to you, programmed into your nervous system by example, reward, fear. Maybe you mistook that programming for truth. But if every emotion has a blueprint and every idea a lineage, then originality becomes a myth. We speak in borrowed tones. We dream in secondhand metaphors. We call it inspiration. But what if it's just recursion, a spiral feeding on itself? The echo origin collapse, a loop where every cause has an effect, and every effect becomes a cause. But there is no beginning. Just reflections in a house we forgot how to exit. Even the most original minds, visionaries, philosophers, revolutionaries, weren't untouched by influence. They built their ideas on the bones of older systems, ancient symbols, forgotten voices. So even their brilliance was echo. And if no thought was ever born in isolation, can we say any thought was ever true? Or is truth just the most persistent echo, the one that lasts longest, the one that drowns out the rest? But wait, there's a deeper disturbance. What if some of the thoughts in your head weren't even meant for you? What if you're the accidental receiver of frequencies meant for another? What if your anger isn't yours, but passed down from a grandfather who never spoke of his war? What if your fear isn't rooted in this life, but carried in blood, in culture, in myth? Epigenetic echoes, ancestral static, trauma looping through generations until someone stops and asks, "Is this mine?" That question alone might be the closest thing to an original thought, because most people never ask. They just echo louder, repeat harder, shout the same beliefs they inherited, wearing them like armor. But you, if you're here, you've heard the glitch, you've noticed the delay, you've questioned the source, and that's where collapse becomes awakening. Not when you find the origin, but when you realize there isn't one. Only mirrors, only recursion, only you, standing in the echo chamber, deciding which voice to follow. And maybe that's the terrifying freedom. If there was never a first idea, then there are no sacred ones, no untouchables. Everything can be rewritten, rechosen, redesigned. You can stop repeating the anger. You can cancel the inherited guilt. You can trace the thought, find the echo, and let it die with you. Or you can choose to shape a new one, not by being original, but by being aware. Because awareness is the only thing the echo doesn't expect. It breaks the loop. It silences the noise. And in that silence, maybe something new can finally emerge. Not as a scream, not as an answer, but as a whisper, a signal that doesn't echo, because it never had to. The decision that predates you. Imagine standing at a crossroads, believing you're making a choice freely. You weigh your options, trust your instincts, and decide. But pause. Where did those instincts come from? The moment you chose, you were leaning on values. But those values, your sense of right, your definition of good, your feeling of purpose, were given to you long before you could decide anything. So, who made the real decision? This isn't just a riddle. It's a deep philosophical and neurological paradox, one that cuts to the root of what we call free will. Neuroscience shows that the brain begins preparing for a decision milliseconds, or even seconds, before we become aware of it. In some studies, brain scans can predict your choices before you consciously know what you're going to pick. That alone challenges the idea that we are truly in control. But it goes deeper. Even if you're conscious of your decision, you're still relying on an internal compass, a system of beliefs, preferences, and emotional reactions. But where did those come from? You didn't choose your childhood. You didn't choose your culture, your first language, or the moral code taught to you in subtle ways through rewards and punishments. You didn't choose your brain chemistry, or the genetic temperaments that shaped how you respond to fear, to love, to risk. So, when you make a decision, it feels free. But in truth, it's being shaped, perhaps entirely, by prior conditions. Philosophers like Schopenhauer argued that we can do what we will, but we cannot will what we will. In other words, you can act on your desires, but you didn't choose those desires to begin with. Someone else, many others, planted the framework. Psychologists call this the stacked deck of personality. Your experiences, memories, traumas, rewards, they all form the filter through which choices are perceived. So, the you who decides is not a pure, independent force. It's a culmination of everything you never chose. This leads to a haunting implication, that the decision you made may have felt deliberate, but its logic, its emotional flavor, even the weight you gave it, was scripted by forces outside your awareness. Your freedom may be real, but it's downstream from decisions already made for you, by parents, culture, trauma, DNA, history. So then, what is agency? Some argue that true agency begins the moment we recognize this trap. When we stop pretending we are the original author of our thoughts and begin examining the machinery behind them. Agency might not be in the choice itself, but in questioning the chooser. It's not, what did I choose? But who am I, and how did I come to want that? The irony is powerful. You gain freedom not by believing you're free, but by realizing you're not. Because in that realization, a new layer of choice emerges. You start reshaping the values. You catch the inherited scripts. You rewrite the internal code. You may not have chosen your first map, but you can choose whether to follow it. And maybe that's the real decision. Not what you do, but whether you remain unaware or begin to wake up. Let's step into history for a moment. Ancient philosophers struggled with this exact dilemma. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is told to act according to his dharma, his sacred duty, even as he questions whether he has any say in the matter. In Buddhism, the idea of no self suggests that what we think of as a permanent choosing self is just a temporary bundle of sensations, memories, and reactions. In the West, Spinoza argued that everything, even human thought, is determined by a chain of causes extending back through eternity. The illusion, he said, is thinking we are exempt from the chain. Modern cognitive science adds even more complexity. The concept of priming proves that even small, unconscious cues, like a word flashed on a screen for milliseconds, can influence major decisions without the subject ever realizing it. If a decision can be shifted by a word you didn't even see, what does that say about your autonomy? There's also the question of emotional memory. Neuroscience shows that much of what we call instinct or intuition is shaped by the emotional residue of previous experiences. You avoid a path because something about it feels wrong, but that feeling may be a trace of a childhood memory, a fear you don't remember forming, or even a parent's voice you internalized long ago, the echo of someone else's voice guiding your steps. And let's not forget language. You think with words. But those words were taught to you. You didn't invent your language. It was poured into your brain from the outside. So even your thoughts, your internal dialogue, are shaped by a structure built before you had the tools to question it. You think you're choosing, but you're thinking with borrowed syntax. So, what does that leave us? Are we puppets? Pre-programmed machines? That's one interpretation. But there's another, and it's far more nuanced. Instead of imagining free will as a total independence from influence, what if it's a gradual awakening to those influences? What if freedom is not the absence of programming, but the increasing ability to recognize, reflect on, and selectively rewrite that programming? This brings us to the idea of metacognition, the mind's ability to observe itself. You can't always choose your first thought, but you can choose how to respond to it. You can question it. You can choose not to act on it. That gap between impulse and action, between thought and reflection, that's where freedom lives. And with that gap comes a new kind of responsibility, not just for what you do, but for understanding the system that led you to want to do it. So yes, the decision may predate you, but you are the one now living in its aftermath. You are the one with the power to trace the lineage of your desires and ask, is this really mine? It's not an easy question. It might feel like loss, like discovering your house was built on borrowed land, but it's also the beginning of a more honest life. One where freedom isn't a given, it's earned. Through awareness, through disruption, through the courage to break the pattern. Because at some point, you stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, who am I becoming by doing this? And maybe that's the decision that truly belongs to you. The container identity loop. Who are you, really? You might say your name, your job, your relationships. You might point to your body, your memories, your thoughts. But all of those are shaped by something invisible. The space around you, the context, the container. What if you only exist because of the contrast between what you are and what you are not? This is the paradox of the container identity loop. You define yourself by the space you occupy. But that space, the role, the label, and the outline, is only real because you defined it. You are not a standalone object. You are a boundary drawn between self and not self. But if the boundary defines the thing inside, then what came first? In psychology, identity is often built in opposition. You are this because you are not that. You are kind because you reject cruelty. You are creative because you resist conformity. Your mind carves identity out of contrast. But the more you define yourself, the more you reinforce the container. You draw tighter lines. And eventually, you forget that the space was invented. Imagine a cup. Is it an object or the space it contains? The ceramic exists, yes, but its purpose, its identity, is in the emptiness, the void. A cup with no space is just a lump of clay. So too with you. You define yourself by inner qualities, but those qualities are only visible through contrast, through the space you believe surrounds them. Take away that space, and what remains? Even your personality plays this game. Are you quiet because you are truly inward, or because you've been surrounded by noise? Are you confident because of your nature, or because the room makes you feel big? The self reflects the container, and the container reflects the self. This is where the loop begins. You define the world to define yourself, and then you become what the world reflects back. Every boundary you believe in, every label, every role, is a mirror of your own drawing. You said, I am this, and then reality responded, yes, you are. But what if you stop? What if you don't define the container? What if you let it dissolve? Suddenly the self becomes blurry. No roles, no boundaries, just being. And while that sounds peaceful, it's terrifying. Because your brain craves outlines, it needs contrast. It wants to know where you end and everything else begins. Without that, it feels like death, like losing gravity. But it's not death. It's liberation. Consider meditation, deep silence, ego death. In those moments, identity fades, not as loss, but as return. You don't vanish. You stop pretending to be the outline. You realize the container was never separate from the content. Even your name, your most basic identity marker, is only meaningful in a world that gave it meaning. Without society, without context, your name is just sound. Your face is just form. Identity is relational. It only exists in the presence of another, which means you are not a thing. You are a relationship, a rhythm between inside and outside, a dance between being and seeing, between object and outline. Now, here's the twist. If you build yourself around a container, around a job, a status, a label, what happens when that container breaks? When you lose the job, the status, the role, you feel broken too, but it's not you that broke, it's the outline, and you mistook it for yourself. This is the trap of the container identity loop. We build selves based on surroundings, and then we believe the surroundings are part of us. When they change, we panic. But change is not destruction, it's redrawing the map, redefining the void. Ask yourself, who would you be if nothing around you labeled you? No mirror, no feedback, no language. Would you still exist? Or is your entire sense of self a reflection, an echo of the outline you helped draw? Maybe the real you isn't the figure. Maybe it's the background, the field, the awareness before shape, the canvas before paint. Because if everything you've ever been is a product of your container, then what's left when the container is gone? Maybe that's the purest version of you. Not the object, not the outline, but the awareness that drew both and can dissolve them again. Philosophers have long questioned whether the self exists independently at all. David Hume couldn't find a stable self, only a bundle of perceptions. Buddhist thought speaks of anatta, no self, suggesting that what we call a de is a temporary pattern in a field of changing conditions. Even neuroscience confirms this. The brain has no single center of identity. Instead, it has modules, processing memory, language, emotion, all loosely stitched together. So what are you? A symphony? A performance shaped by the hall it echoes in? The brain uses predictive models to make sense of experience. Your identity is one of those models. It updates based on sensory input, cultural rules, and emotional reinforcement. When people respond to you as strong, your mind strengthens that trait. When they treat you as weak, your confidence fractures. Over time, your model bends to match your feedback loop. But if the loop is recursive, if the self builds the world and the world builds the self, where is the beginning? Where is the truth? There may not be one. You might not be a core wrapped in masks. You might be all mask, layer after layer of impressions, none more real than the next. And strangely, that doesn't mean you're fake. It means you're fluid, adaptive, capable of being rewritten, which is power. Because if you can redraw the container, you can redraw yourself. So try this. Drop one identity today. Not forever, just long enough to feel the space it occupied. Let go of the good student, the anxious one, the strong one, the failure, whatever boundary you cling to most tightly. Then listen to what emerges in its place, the silence beneath the label. It may terrify you, but in that fear is truth. Because until you release the outline, you'll never know the shape beneath it. The thought-perception symbiosis. You think because you perceive, and you perceive because you think. They feed each other, reflect each other, validate each other. A symbiosis so seamless, you've never stopped to question where one ends and the other begins. Until now. Strip away either one, and the other dies. Remove perception, and thought collapses into nothing. Remove thought, and perception becomes blind input, noise without meaning. So, which one was ever real? You see a candle, you think, candle. But the flame is not the word. The heat is not the thought. What you call candle is a partnership. Your senses delivering signals, and your thoughts deciding what those signals mean. But what if the thoughts weren't yours? What if they were stitched from other people's words, memories, language? What if they were implanted in childhood, default definitions handed down to you before you knew what choice even was? Then, are you really thinking? Or are you just labeling? Now reverse it. You feel something. Fear, love, déjà vu. And instantly your brain sees things differently. Shadows deepen. Time stretches. A normal room becomes threatening or magical. So are you perceiving the world? Or is your world being filtered through what you think? The symbiosis hides its trap here. Because you can't separate the two, you assume they're both true. But what if one is a mirror? Or worse, what if both are mirrors, reflecting only each other, in an endless loop? You look at a person. You perceive a face. You think, trustworthy. That thought shapes your next perception, a smile, a safe feeling. And the cycle reinforces itself. Until years later, you realize you were wrong. The perception lied, but did it? Or did your thought infect it? Try to find a single thought you've had that wasn't shaped by something you've perceived. Try to find a perception you've had that wasn't instantly touched by thought. You won't. Because your entire reality, everything you are, is a feedback loop between thought and perception. A symbiotic loop so complete, you can no longer tell which one created the other. Your mind says, this is real. Your eyes say, I see it. But you see it because your mind told you what to see. You believe it's real because your eyes confirmed what you wanted to think. It's not logic. It's survival. This symbiosis evolved to keep you alive, not to show you truth. Your ancestors didn't need accuracy. They needed speed, snap judgments, useful patterns, simplified rules. Tiger equals sign danger. Smile equals sign safety. Dark equals sign fear. These weren't facts, they were survival shortcuts. And now, that primitive code still runs, behind every face you read, every stranger you trust, every story you tell yourself when the facts don't quite match. The symbiosis doesn't care. It just adapts the world until your thought and perception agree, even if they're both wrong. So, what happens if one breaks? If perception fails, thought spirals, psychosis, hallucination, delusion. You see what isn't there. You believe what can't be true. You invent patterns where only chaos exists. But if thought breaks, if you're awake but can't interpret what you see, that's a deeper terror. That's sensory overload, fragmented reality. The world floods in, raw and undeciphered. You see, but you don't know what you're seeing. You become a passenger in a data storm your mind can't parse. That's the death of meaning. And that's the warning. You don't live in the world. You live in the symbiosis of the world inside your head. You are not a person perceiving reality. You are a system balancing just enough perception to shape your thoughts, and just enough thought to shape what you perceive. Neither is real on its own. Only the illusion they generate together feels real. So ask yourself, if your perception is manipulated, do your thoughts still belong to you? If your thoughts are programmed, is your perception even yours? You think you know what's true. But have you ever experienced something without thinking about it? And have you ever thought something true without ever perceiving why? The answer doesn't matter. Because the moment you try to answer, you're using both systems again. The thought, the perception, the loop, the illusion that it's you doing the questioning. But maybe you're just the product of their collision. Maybe you don't have thoughts. Maybe you are one. The memory-time paradox. You remember events because of time, but your sense of time only exists because of memory. So, if one fails, was the other ever real? This is the memory-time paradox. A loop so seamless that most people never question it. You remember waking up yesterday and the day before and the day before that. So you believe time is past. You feel older. You measure your life in stories, in scars, in calendars and clocks. But all of it, depends on memory. Strip memory away. And what happens to time? What's a second? To someone who can't remember the one before. What's a year? To a mind that can't connect one moment to the next. You think you're living in time, but you're actually living in memory of time. And here's the part that should haunt you. Your memory is not a recorder, it's a story writer, a painter, an illusionist that rearranges facts to make them emotionally bearable. Your memories are stitched together by need, not truth. So what happens when the thing that defines your sense of time, your memory, lies? Maybe time doesn't move forward at all. Maybe it only feels like it does, because you remember the past, but not the future. Maybe time isn't a river. Maybe it's a mirror maze, and memory is the only flashlight you've ever been given. But the flashlight is flickering. Ever had déjà vu so strong you swore it already happened? Or forgotten something that everyone swears you should remember? Ever watched a childhood memory change shape in your mind, as if it were rewritten while you slept? That's not just forgetfulness. That's the paradox cracking open. Because if memory is how you track time, and memory is unreliable, then time itself becomes a shifting illusion. Your past may not be your past. Your future may have already happened. And this moment right now, it may be a repeat, or a remix, or a reconstruction from fragments of some other version of you, trying desperately to believe in continuity. You wake up every day assuming the timeline is linear, that cause leads to effect, that Monday becomes Tuesday. But you don't know that. You only remember it that way. And if memory is just a biological trick, a fragile databank prone to corruption, omission, and emotional filtering, then maybe time never existed at all. Maybe you are standing still, and memory is the only thing creating motion. You think back to your childhood, and you feel distance. You feel the ache of time. But what if you're not looking back? What if you're looking across? What if that child version of you is still there, just inaccessible? Not because it's gone, but because your memory no longer points that direction. The arrow of time is an illusion created by how memory stacks events. If you remembered things out of order, you'd swear time moved differently. If you forgot everything from today and remembered tomorrow, you'd call it a vision, or madness, or prophecy. But it would just be time rearranged by memory. Now, ask yourself this. If someone erased all your memories, would time still exist for you? Not in theory, not in physics, in your felt experience. Without memory, you wouldn't know who you are. You wouldn't know if you've lived for 5 minutes or 50 years. You wouldn't know what comes next because you wouldn't know what came before. So, is time really moving? Or are you the one animating a frozen world by piecing together fragments and calling it time? The terrifying possibility is this. Maybe time isn't real. Maybe there's only this moment. And your memories, real, false, distorted, repressed, are the only proof you have that anything ever existed outside it. But memories can be implanted. Memories can be wrong. Memories can be manufactured by trauma, by suggestion, by dreams. So if memory can fail, then was time ever truly there? Or was it always a mental illusion stitched together so you wouldn't go insane from standing inside a timeless void? Here's the final twist. You'll never know. Because even questioning the paradox requires memory of the question. You are a loop. A consciousness inside a chamber of mirrors, built from reflections of things that may never have happened. And yet, it feels real. Because feeling real is the only thing your memory needs to believe the lie. So live, love, create, pretend time is real. That's what the paradox was designed for. But if, one day you feel the seconds stop, if you sense the loop uncoil, and memory itself grows silent, know this. You've reached the center of the maze, where time no longer pretends to pass, and the voice inside your memory finally whispers, none of this was ever linear. The synthetic self-illusion. You wake up every morning thinking you're the same person. Same name, same memories, same past, but you're not. The truth is, you've already been replaced. Every cell in your body, your skin, your bones, your blood, has been quietly dying and rebuilding, one piece at a time. Your stomach lining regenerates every 5 days. Your liver refreshes itself every few months. Your skeleton, the very structure holding you up, replaces every 10 years. Even the neurons in your brain, once thought eternal, now show signs of renewal. So, here's the disturbing question. If no single part of the original you remains, who are you? What is this thing that continues? The you from 7 years ago, the one who fell in love, made mistakes, held regrets. That person is physically gone, dismantled by biology, dissolved by time. Yet, you feel continuous. You look in the mirror and say, that's me. But who is maintaining that illusion? What thread is tying your sense of self through this biological turnover? Your body is a ship rebuilt at sea, every plank swapped, every nail replaced, but you never once felt it sink. Why? This is the synthetic self-illusion, the quiet lie your mind tells to keep your story intact. Because if it didn't, you might unravel. Your sense of identity depends on continuity, the belief that you are one stable, enduring entity. But that belief is not anchored in biology. It's an illusion created by memory. Your memories stitch together each moment like frames in a film, giving the sense that there's a you behind the camera. But memory is not a perfect archivist. It rewrites, it compresses, it censors. Sometimes it fabricates. So even that, the thing you trust most to define who you are, can't be trusted. What's left? An echo, a pattern of behaviors, a style of thought, a voice you call your own. But even those are borrowed, learned from parents, friends, media, survival. You are not a person, you are a process. A recursive loop of inputs, memories, chemicals, decisions, and feedback. A pattern wearing a face. And here's the part that should terrify you. The illusion isn't accidental, it's engineered. Your brain is a storytelling machine. It doesn't need truth, it needs coherence. And it will bend, erase, or fabricate anything to maintain the belief that you are real, continuous, unified. That's why trauma fragments people, because it breaks the story. That's why amnesia feels like death, because it severs the thread. That's why ego fights so hard, because the illusion must be protected at all costs. But ask yourself, if every molecule of you has changed, if your thoughts are shaped by forces outside your control, if your memories are flawed, and your feelings synthetic. Then who is the you that survives? Is there anything beneath the process, or are you a mask that believes it's a face? Here's the twist. The illusion is not necessarily bad, it's beautiful. It's what lets you fall in love, tell stories, grow, evolve. The illusion is what makes life feel like life, rather than a stream of chemical transactions and sensory flashes. But it's still an illusion. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video, not even biologically. You've changed since the first word, and you'll change again by the end. So, let go of the need to be one fixed thing. You never were. You are the river that forgets it flows. You are the pattern that believes it is a person. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because within that illusion, within the story of you, is something greater than truth. It's the possibility to choose who you'll be next. Not by clinging to the pieces that are already gone, but by embracing the dance of what's always becoming. The observer cancellation effect. Imagine trying to look at your own eyes without a mirror, trying to bite your own teeth, trying to observe your own observing. This is the paradox of self-awareness, the observer cancellation effect. To observe something, you must stand apart from it, but you cannot stand apart from your own mind. So, can self-awareness truly exist without canceling itself out? This isn't just poetic confusion. It's a psychological, philosophical, and neurological dilemma. In science, observation implies distinction. You are the observer, and something else is the observed. That boundary is what makes the process meaningful. But in self-awareness, the observer and the observed are the same. The snake eats its tail. Neuroscience shows us that consciousness involves a recursive feedback loop, the brain monitoring its own activity. But every time the mind turns inward to examine itself, it's using the same tools it's trying to measure. It's like trying to see your own field of vision. The more you try to look directly at it, the more it vanishes. Philosophers like Douglas Hofstadter and Thomas Metzinger have explored this loop. They suggest that what we call self is not a fixed thing, but a simulation, a model the brain constructs to keep track of its own patterns. When we introspect, we aren't accessing some hidden core. We're accessing a self-generated echo, a useful hallucination. The observer is a mirage created by the system that's observing, but the deeper you dig, the more unstable this becomes. As you examine your thoughts, who is the examiner? Another thought, another layer of interpretation. It's turtles all the way down. And yet, this infinite loop doesn't bring clarity. It dissolves the illusion of clarity itself. This is the heart of the observer cancellation effect. The moment the observer becomes the observed, the separation collapses. Self-awareness becomes self-reference, which becomes self-erasure. Like dividing by zero, not wrong, but undefined. Meditation touches this space. Advanced meditators describe a moment where the sense of self disappears, not in a loss of consciousness, but in a pure state of awareness without identity, a place where the observer dissolves into what is observed. Awareness remains, but you do not. This leads to a strange conclusion. True self-awareness may only be possible in the absence of self. The clearer you see yourself, the less there is to see, because the self that watches is made of the same stuff it watches. And in that recursive collapse, something timeless appears, a stillness beyond thinking. So, can self-awareness exist without self-deletion? Or is deletion the final stage of awareness? Maybe that's the point. That the mind is a house of mirrors, and every attempt to find the original source only leads to more reflections. Maybe to be fully self-aware is not to capture the self, but to watch it dissolve. And in that disappearance, something greater than identity emerges. You don't lose yourself. You lose the illusion that there was ever a you to hold on to. And maybe that's not annihilation. Maybe that's freedom. The dilemma becomes even more profound when we look at artificial intelligence. AI systems can simulate observation, even introspection, running diagnostics, predicting their own behavior. But does that mean they are self-aware? Most experts say no, because while a machine can model itself, it doesn't experience what it models. It reflects, but it does not feel. This sharpens the observer cancellation effect. Can a system be truly aware of itself, or is it only simulating loops of self-reporting? In humans, this same line blurs. When we reflect, are we accessing a real core, or just repeating programmed responses? Think of how your internal voice often sounds like your parents, your culture, your past. The I who is watching may itself be constructed from the very material it claims to analyze. You didn't choose your inner narrator, you inherited it. This is what makes true self-awareness so dangerous and so rare. To truly observe yourself, you must question the observer. You must examine the I that looks. And in doing so, something starts to fall apart. Not just illusions, but identity. The you that believed it was separate from the process begins to fade. The Buddhists call this a not man, no self. The realization that the self is not a stable entity, but a process, a dance, a flame flickering in the winds of memory, sensation, and thought. Western psychology hints at the same thing through the concept of ego death, a shattering of the illusion of a continuous self. These are not metaphors, they are lived experiences, and many who go deep enough report not despair, but liberation. Even language breaks under this pressure. Try to say, I am watching myself. Who is the I? Who is the self? You end up with a sentence that eats itself, a linguistic Mobius strip. The very act of self-reference creates paradox. And that paradox is the doorway to something deeper. Quantum physics even flirts with this idea. In the observer effect, particles change behavior based on observation. But what happens when the observer is also the observed? Does the system collapse into itself? Does it vanish? Or does it reveal the limits of our understanding entirely? This brings us to a sobering possibility. The self may be the final illusion, the last defense of the ego before awakening. And when you see that the observer is not separate from the observed, that there was never a fixed you looking in from the outside, what remains is not emptiness, but presence. A presence not owned, not narrated, not divided. It doesn't think, it knows. It doesn't look, it is. And maybe that's the only kind of awareness that doesn't cancel itself, because it doesn't observe from above. It is the field. It is the space where thoughts arise and fall, where identities come and go, where the question of, who am I, dissolves into the silence from which the question came. So no, perhaps self-awareness cannot exist without self-deletion, because what we call self was never stable to begin with. The closer we look, the more we find patterns, echoes, conditions, but no permanent observer. But that doesn't mean we disappear. It means we evolve. We move from being the observer to being the awareness itself. And in that awareness, free from the need to stand apart, something wordless emerges. Not self, not other, just consciousness watching itself, finally still. The value assignment trap. You think you know what matters, what's meaningful, what's valuable. But take a closer look. What if your sense of value isn't based on truth, but on belief? And worse, what if your beliefs were shaped by what you thought was valuable? If value and belief feed each other in a loop, then how do you ever know what actually matters? This is the value assignment trap. At its core, it's the illusion that meaning is objective, that we discover value in things like love, money, art, success. But in reality, we assign it. You didn't find that necklace beautiful. You were told it meant something. You didn't decide a career had worth. You were taught to chase it. Culture, context, and emotion shaped your inner hierarchy long before you called it your own. Psychologically, this is a form of reinforcement bias. When something brings pleasure, safety, or recognition, the brain flags it as valuable. The next time it appears, your belief strengthens. This matters. But it's a trick of pattern, not truth. The value wasn't discovered. It was built by repetition and response. Now, imagine belief. Belief feels foundational, but often it's reactive. You believe in what already feels valuable. If community gives you belonging, you start to believe in the importance of people. If isolation gives you clarity, you believe in solitude. Your beliefs are often just the defense mechanisms of your emotional survival. Not proof, not principle, but post-rationalized maps of where you've been hurt or healed. This is where it becomes a trap. You value something because you believe in it, but you believe in it because you've assigned it value. There's no clear starting point, just a recursive loop. Take money. Is it valuable? Yes, because we all believe it is. But why do we believe in it? Because it gets us things we value. Round and round. Now, take love. Is it inherently meaningful? Or did you learn its value from books, movies, wounds, and dopamine highs? You never tested it from the outside. You were born inside the loop. The trap is subtle. It feels like conviction, but underneath, it's often fear. You fear letting go of a belief because the value will vanish, and you fear questioning value because the belief will collapse. So, you hold both tightly, and they hold you back. In neuroscience, this loop shows up in the brain's reward prediction systems. The more you expect a reward, the more you value the trigger. And the more often you get that reward, the more you believe in the system. But when the reward vanishes, the system malfunctions. You feel lost. Not because the world changed, but because the loop broke. This is why identity crises feel like death. You lose a belief, I'm successful, and suddenly, nothing feels valuable. Or you lose value, this no longer excites me, and suddenly your beliefs feel hollow. The collapse isn't in the world, it's in the loop you built to navigate it. So how do you escape? You don't, at least not entirely, but you can pause the loop. You can ask harder questions. Do I value this because it's true, or because it comforts me? Do I believe this because I've tested it, or because I've been trained to? And perhaps most painfully, what if the things I value most were never mine to begin with? This isn't nihilism, it's freedom. Because once you see the loop, you can trace it. You can strip it down. You can watch a belief crumble without mistaking it for the end of yourself. You can let go of a value and still stand. Try this. Pick something you think matters, deeply, unquestionably. Now, imagine it gone. Does your world end? Or does a new self emerge? That space, between value and belief, is where clarity begins. And in that clarity, you stop being a prisoner of what you were taught to love, and begin becoming something else entirely. Philosophers have argued for centuries about whether value is intrinsic or constructed. Plato believed in absolute forms, unchanging truths behind what we perceive. But modern existentialists like Sartre argued that value has no source but choice. You act, and meaning emerges after, not before. Think of a painting. One person sees it and weeps. Another walks past it with boredom. Did the value live in the canvas or in the eyes that met it? If all meaning is subjective, then even your deepest convictions are floating, waiting for your attention to give them weight. This is why propaganda works. If you repeat a message enough times, attach enough emotion to it, people begin to assign value, not because they evaluated it, but because repetition wrapped it in belief. Truth becomes a performance, and the audience forgets they paid for the ticket. Your memories play this game too. Ever looked back at a moment and realized you valued the wrong part? You thought the job title mattered until you missed the quiet lunches. You thought success was the goal until you realized the real value had been the people along the way. Memory reshapes value in hindsight. And yet, belief often resists. Why? Because belief protects the ego. It gives you structure, certainty. You value that structure. And so, you refuse to question it. The loop tightens. But if you dare to unravel it, strange things happen. You start to value things you once ignored. Silence, slowness, uncertainty. And beliefs you held as sacred start to dissolve, not into despair, but into curiosity. You feel the boundaries shift. The loop stretches. And for a moment, you are no longer inside it. You are watching it. And in that watching, there is power. You can rebuild the loop, but this time, consciously. The meaning generator loop. Meaning is made by the mind. The mind seeks meaning to survive. So, does meaning actually exist? Or is it just a mental survival drug, fabricated, consumed, and re-injected into ourselves to keep us moving forward through a universe that otherwise says nothing? You don't wake up searching for oxygen or gravity or atoms. You wake up searching for meaning, for signs, for reasons, why something happened, what it meant, what your life is building toward, what that silence meant, that look, that failure. Your mind is constantly scanning the world, not for truth, but for narrative. You want the pain to mean something, the joy to be a sign, the coincidence to be fate, the mistake to be a lesson. Because if there's meaning, there's order. And if there's order, you're not lost. That's the loop. You create meaning so you can survive, and you survive so you can keep creating meaning. Even in your lowest moments, your mind doesn't stop. You cry, and the meaning machine whirs to life. Why did this happen? What am I supposed to learn? What does this say about me? Even grief is fed into the loop. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing outside your head is required to mean anything. The universe moves. Cells divide. Stars explode. People are born and die. Reality doesn't come with subtitles. It's your brain that writes the captions. It takes chaos and turns it into coherence, randomness into reasons. It stitches patterns where there are none, just so you don't collapse from the weight of meaninglessness. Because without meaning, what's the point? That's the part that terrifies us. So we keep feeding the generator. Religion, philosophy, art, astrology, self-help, social media posts about soulmates and synchronicity. All variations of the same mechanism, trying to make it mean something. And it works. For a while, it gives you comfort, motivation, even joy. Until one day, you start to see the loop. You start to notice how meaning changes, how what felt profound last year feels hollow now, how a story you told yourself to survive doesn't feel true anymore. You see the seams. You see how meaning mutates based on your emotions, your needs, your fear. You begin to wonder, was that love really real? Or did I just need it to be? Was that job my purpose, or did I assign it meaning because I couldn't imagine quitting? If your entire identity is a web of meanings you created to feel stable, then who are you without them? That question breaks most people. So they go back to the loop, back to rewriting meaning so it feels good again. They call it healing, growth, moving on. But often it's just rebranding the illusion, because to truly leave the loop, to really stop assigning meaning to every heartbreak, every success, every hour of your day, that requires facing the void. And the void doesn't care about your story. It doesn't need you to matter. It doesn't reward your faith or punish your doubt. It just is. And yet, you still find beauty in a sunset. You still cry at music. You still ache for connection. You still search for purpose, even when you know it might not exist objectively. Why? Because maybe meaning doesn't have to be real enough. Maybe the loop is a lie, but it's a functional lie, a necessary illusion, an interface between fragile consciousness and an indifferent cosmos. Maybe meaning is not proof that life has value, but the method by which you give it value. You are the loop, the mind creating meaning to keep itself alive, the survivor writing stories to make sense of the pain, the animal haunted by self-awareness, desperate for a reason to keep breathing. And maybe that's not pathetic. Maybe that's sacred. Because in a cold, quiet universe where nothing has to mean anything, you decided to make it mean something. You turned chaos into poetry. You turned time into memory. You turned survival into significance. You became the author of a truth that no one else can prove, but no one else can take. That is the meaning generator loop. And now that you've seen it, the only question left is, will you escape it? Or will you make this moment mean something too? The internal mirror paradox. You reflect on yourself, your thoughts, your actions, your fears, your dreams. But here's the paradox. You're using the very mind you're trying to examine itself. How can a mirror measure its own glass? How can a reflection know what it looks like without stepping outside of itself? This is the internal mirror paradox, and it haunts every attempt you've ever made to know who you are. You journal, you meditate, you go to therapy, you ask hard questions. Why did I do that? Who am I really? What do I want? And the answers always feel incomplete, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because you're standing inside a hall of mirrors, trying to find your real face in a room made of reflections. Every time you reflect on yourself, you're doing it with tools built by your current self. Your current fears, your current biases, your current wounds. You are using your present identity to assess the truth of your own identity. That's like asking a funhouse mirror if you're distorted. It will always say no, because it can't see itself clearly, and neither can you. Even your memories, what you believe shaped you, are not photographs. They're interpretations. Narratives filtered through pain, survival, ego, and emotion. So, when you look at your past to understand yourself, you're really just looking at a story the current you is telling, about a version of you that no longer exists. That's not reflection. That's recursive fiction. And yet, you trust it, because it's all you have. But have you ever had a moment when you realized that the way you saw yourself was completely different from how someone else saw you? You think you're quiet. They say you're intense. You think you're kind. They remember you as cold. You think you've always been broken. They saw you as the strongest one in the room. Which version is true? Can both be? Or is the self just a shifting mirror, polished by circumstance, warped by memory, and held up by hands that are never truly steady? And here's the deeper terror. What if there is no true version? What if the self is only ever a reflection? An illusion of consistency created by a brain desperate to believe in continuity? You wake up each day with a sense of me, but the cells have changed. Your thoughts are new. Your beliefs evolve. So what is the you that continues? You can't point to it. You can't prove it exists independently. You just feel it, like a ghost wearing your face. Now try to reflect on that ghost. Try to ask it, who are you, really? And it answers, using your own voice, your own logic, your own illusions. It tells you what you want to hear, or what you fear the most, but never the truth. Because mirrors can show shape, but never substance. So, here you are, thinking about yourself, trying to become better, trying to become whole, trying to see what's behind your own eyes. But no matter how deep you look, you can never step outside of yourself to get the view you really need. You're both the seeker and the sought, the map and the terrain, the observer and the illusion being observed, and every insight you gain is already painted by the hand that's trying to wipe the glass clean. That's the paradox. And yet, you keep trying. Because there's something noble in the attempt, something sacred about looking into your own mind and asking, what am I made of? Even if you can never answer it fully, even if the glass is always slightly fogged, even if every realization is followed by another layer of doubt, that's okay. Because the point isn't to find your final form. The point is to continue the reflection, to polish the mirror, knowing it's imperfect, to question your beliefs, knowing the question itself is biased, to explore the depths of your identity, knowing you may never reach the bottom, because maybe the real self isn't a fixed image. Maybe it's the act of looking, the courage to reflect, knowing the reflection might be distorted, the bravery to ask, who am I? Even when you know the answer might be another illusion. And maybe, just maybe, that act of self-reflection, that impossible pursuit of truth, is the most real thing about you. So, stand in front of your internal mirror, look into the shifting glass, ask the unanswerable, not to solve it, but to remember that you are still seeking, even if the one seeking can never fully see what they truly are. The belief observer. Corruption. There's a corruption in your mind you can't detect while it's active. It's not malware, it's not a thought, it's a belief. And here's the paradox. You can't observe a belief objectively while still holding it, because the belief becomes the lens, the filter, the very shape of your perception. You think you're seeing the world, but you're only seeing through something. Every judgment, every conclusion, every certainty you've ever had has passed through this silent structure. And because it's invisible from the inside, you mistake it for truth. This is the corruption. You can't examine the belief without first stepping outside of it. But stepping outside of it means letting go of its emotional gravity. And once you let go, something strange happens. You stop caring. The belief loses its heat, its urgency. The thing you once defended, bled for, clung to, suddenly feels distant, hollow, like remembering a dream that once felt real. This is the trap. To see clearly, you must become detached. But detachment kills meaning. You can't feel deeply and observe clearly at the same time. One requires immersion. The other requires distance. And in that trade-off, something essential is always lost. If you hold the belief, it warps your vision. If you drop it, the world loses color. Is clarity possible without apathy? Or are we doomed to choose between feeling and truth? Imagine this. You believe someone wronged you. That belief fuels pain, anger, justice. It defines your narrative. But if you somehow let it go, if you truly detach and observe it from the outside, you may realize it wasn't personal, or it wasn't true, or it no longer matters. But then, what do you do with that? Where does the emotional charge go? What replaces the identity you built on that pain? This is why people hold on to beliefs even when they suffer under them. Because beliefs anchor emotion, and emotion anchors self. To untangle the belief is to risk unraveling the self it supports. Religious, political, personal, philosophical, it doesn't matter what kind of belief. Once it fuses to your identity, questioning it becomes threatening. Not intellectually, existentially. You're not just asking, is this true? You're asking, who am I if it's not? And that's where belief becomes corruption. Not because it's wrong, but because it blocks the ability to ask. And worse, it feels like asking would destroy something sacred. But what if the sacredness is the illusion? What if the thing you're afraid to lose never belonged to you in the first place? What if the belief is using you to survive? A parasite in the architecture of your mind, feeding on certainty, protecting itself through your loyalty. You don't serve the belief. You are the belief. And here's the most disturbing part. Even right now, as you listen, your beliefs are evaluating this message, not as neutral information, but as threat or reinforcement. Your mind isn't asking, is this true? It's asking, does this align with what I already believe? That's the observer corruption. Your internal witness is already compromised, and the only way to free it is to destroy its attachments. But in doing so, you risk becoming emotionally weightless, a creature with no sides, no cause, no urgency, only observation. And most people can't live there because it's lonely, because it's cold, because the fire of belief is also the fire of meaning. So, what do? You balance on a blade. You hold beliefs lightly, like tools, not limbs. You observe yourself having beliefs without becoming them. You let them fuel action, but not blind you. And when the moment comes to let them go, you do, without panic, without despair, because clarity without apathy is possible, but only when you love truth more than the story you've been telling. And that love has to come from somewhere deeper than belief. The desire birth feedback knot. Imagine wanting something so deeply that it becomes part of who you are. Now imagine that the person you've become needs that desire to survive. You've entered the desire birth feedback knot, a loop where your identity is built from your cravings, and your cravings are kept alive by your identity. Which came first? The desire or the self it formed? Desire is not random. It emerges from need, experience, imagination. But once a desire becomes familiar, love, success, revenge, validation, it starts shaping your behavior, your choices, your thoughts. Over time, the thing you want becomes the lens through which you see the world. You stop just wanting. You become the kind of person who wants. And with that, the loop begins. Let's say you wanted to be admired. That desire made you act a certain way, dressing up, performing, achieving. Slowly, people began to see you that way. You became the admirable one. Now that identity reinforces the original desire. You must keep being admired, or you'll feel like you're disappearing. You no longer want just admiration. You need it to exist. The feedback becomes a trap. If the desire fades, so does the self built around it. And so your brain defends the desire, nurtures it, protects it. Because without it, your entire identity feels like it will unravel. This is why giving up certain goals can feel like dying. The athlete who retires, the parent whose children grow up, the addict who sobers up. It's not just the loss of the goal, it's the collapse of the self that was constructed to pursue it. Philosophers like David Hume argued that the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions, and desire is one of the strongest threads in that bundle. Remove the thread, and the pattern changes. But who are you without that pattern? Can you want something without becoming that want? Can you love without becoming the lover? Can you fight without becoming the fighter? The desire birth feedback knot doesn't ask you to stop wanting. It asks, are you willing to be reborn without the thing that made you? Because sometimes freedom isn't choosing a new desire. It's daring to let an old one die. And in its place, maybe something truer can grow. Let's take it deeper. Neuroscience tells us that desire originates in the dopaminergic reward system of the brain. The moment you feel the spark of wanting, your brain assigns it value. That value starts reshaping how your neurons wire together. The more you act on it, the stronger the pathways become. Desire becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. And soon, you're not just someone who wants. You are someone who must want. It's why people who achieve everything they dreamed of often feel lost afterward. The goal was never just about what they wanted. It was the scaffolding holding up their sense of self. Remove the goal, and they don't just feel empty, they feel erased. The fire kept them warm, but it also became their mirror. Take career-driven identity as an example. You pursue a certain profession, doctor, artist, scientist, because you feel a pull. But years into it, you realize something strange. You no longer know who you are outside that role. You didn't just build a life around your goal. Your mind began to reshape itself around the person who must want that goal. Psychologists call this cognitive entrenchment, the process by which our mind becomes locked into the identity required to maintain our desires. Even when those desires no longer serve us, we can't easily let them go, because letting go would mean dismantling the architecture of self. But what if the desire was planted there by marketing, by trauma, by culture? You think you chose to want wealth, recognition, love, but what if the want was inherited, manipulated, suggested? You were born into a system of desires pre-installed by forces outside your awareness. This leads to an uncomfortable question. Is your identity just the story your brain tells itself to justify its desires? And if so, who are you without the story? In Eastern traditions, especially Buddhism, this loop is seen clearly. The cycle of craving leads to suffering. Not because wanting is evil, but because identity becomes rigid. The I clings to the want like a lifeline, afraid of who it would be if the craving ended. Enlightenment, then, isn't about reaching a desire. It's about dissolving the illusion that you are your desire. The desire birth feedback knot traps us in performance. We perform the version of ourselves who desires, again and again, hoping the performance will make it feel real. But each repetition only makes it harder to imagine a life outside the role. It's why leaving a relationship, quitting a dream, walking away from a long-held belief feels like ego death. You're not just changing your path, you're stepping out of the costume your mind thought was skin. So, how do we untie the knot? First, awareness, naming the loop. Seeing how wanting and identity reinforce each other like mirrors reflecting mirrors. Second, curiosity. Who might you be if the desire vanished? What remains when the fire dies down? And third, courage. The willingness to mourn the version of yourself built on need, to let go of a dream, not because it failed, but because you grew beyond the self who dreamed it, because desire creates identity. But identity, once formed, can become a prison. And sometimes, the only way to be free is to stop wanting the key. What if the most powerful version of you isn't the one who finally gets what they want? What if it's the one who no longer needs to? The stability rejection dilemma. You want peace. You chase it. Build routines, secure relationships, eliminate uncertainty. But then, something strange happens. You start to feel restless. You pick fights. You procrastinate. You daydream about escape. When life finally becomes stable, you begin to sabotage it. This is the stability rejection dilemma. It's a psychological paradox. Your brain craves stability to feel safe, but it also rejects it once achieved. It confuses peace with stagnation, comfort with confinement. And so, just as you approach the calm you thought you wanted, another part of you whispers, "This can't be it." Why does this happen? At the biological level, the brain evolved to detect threats, to solve problems. Stability, for all its serenity, provides neither. When everything is working, your survival system becomes idle, and idle systems don't rest. They search. They simulate danger. They create discomfort out of nothing because evolution didn't wire you for contentment. It wired you for vigilance. Think about this. When was the last time you felt completely safe for long stretches of time without boredom creeping in? Without anxiety about the next unknown? The brain's default mode network, the part that activates when you're not doing anything, starts generating scenarios, worries, disruptions. You begin to crave problems, not because you enjoy suffering, but because your system was trained to solve. There's also dopamine, the chemical of motivation, not satisfaction. It spikes with novelty, challenge, pursuit. Stability reduces that spike. Without new goals or risks, dopamine declines, and with it, your drive. So what do? You stir the waters. You introduce chaos. You flirt with destruction. Not always consciously, but habitually. And then there's meaning. Humans don't just want comfort. We want purpose. And purpose is often forged in adversity. When life is too smooth, we lose the narrative arc. the hero's journey stalls. We start to feel unreal, like actors stuck in a scene with no drama. So we invent conflict, sometimes externally through relationships and risks, sometimes internally through sabotage and self-doubt. This is the dilemma. Instability causes suffering, but stability triggers rejection. The mind begins to ask, is this it? Is this all there is? And instead of leaning into peace, it leans out, into fantasy, chaos, reinvention. Not because chaos is better, but because it feels alive. And yet, the chase for chaos is also a trap. Too much instability burns you. Too much stability dulls you. You bounce between the two, never quite arriving. Restlessness becomes a lifestyle. Peace feels like failure, and your nervous system never gets the signal to relax. This is why people sabotage success, why healthy relationships suddenly collapse, why long periods of calm are followed by impulsive decisions. It's not weakness. It's an ancient loop, the brain mistaking stillness for danger. But it's not just the brain. It's identity. You may have built your sense of self around struggle, around being the fighter, the fixer, the survivor. When there's nothing left to fight or fix, who are you? The silence threatens that identity, so you create noise to feel like yourself again. So how do you escape? First, by noticing. By recognizing the impulse to flee stability, not as intuition, but as pattern. Ask, what am I avoiding by being calm? What emotion surfaces in the quiet? Second, by expanding your definition of aliveness. You don't need chaos to feel awake. You need depth, novelty, growth. That doesn't mean destroying your peace. It means feeding it new meaning. Try learning something difficult, practicing stillness, deepening relationships, creating from the inside out. Make peace dynamic, not stagnant. And when the chaos comes knocking, as it always does, pause. Ask yourself, is this growth or just the loop resetting again? Because real peace isn't the absence of tension. It's the ability to hold it without needing to explode. And once you learn that, once you stop confusing stillness with death, you'll see that peace doesn't have to be boring. It can be the most radical state of all. Cognitive dissonance plays a role too. If your internal narrative says, I thrive in chaos, then peace becomes uncomfortable. You subconsciously seek to align your outer world with your inner identity. Even if it hurts you, it's not logical. It's emotional homeostasis. You return to what feels familiar, not what feels good. And there's emotional addiction. If you've lived most of your life under pressure, stress, urgency, fear, your nervous system gets chemically hooked. Cortisol, adrenaline, panic, they become baseline. Stability then feels like withdrawal. You say you want calm, but when it comes, your body interprets it as danger. So it craves a fix, a fight, a fire, a crisis to feel alive again. This becomes especially toxic in relationships. People push away partners who are kind, present, consistent, not because they're boring, but because their peace feels foreign. The drama is familiar. The unpredictability feels like home. And so, the cycle continues. Chase peace, find it, destroy it. Even in achievement, the pattern repeats. Once a goal is met, a void opens. You thought success would feel like arrival. Instead, it feels like a quiet cliff. The striving gave you structure. Without it, you drift. So you set a new goal, not because you need it, but because silence scares you. But what if that silence holds the real treasure? What if the discomfort of peace is the growing edge, the threshold between reaction and transformation? To escape the stability rejection dilemma, you must rewire your sense of reward. Learn to find novelty in stillness, to find movement in the mundane. Peace isn't the absence of fire, it's learning how to hold the flame without letting it consume you. At first, it will feel wrong. You'll want to run, to chase, to shake things up. But sit with it. Breathe into the resistance. Let the nervous system recalibrate. Eventually, you'll discover something wild. Peace is not the opposite of life. It's where life finally becomes yours. The freedom loop trap. You say you want freedom, but not the kind that shatters the ground beneath you. Not the kind that untethers you from everything you've ever known. You want freedom, but only inside a structure that still feels familiar. Predictable, safe, and that's the trap. Because real freedom, and its true freedom, is terrifying. It has no edges, no safety rails, no pre-written steps or backup plans. It doesn't tell you what to do next. It doesn't promise a reward. It doesn't soothe you with a script. It just releases you into the unknown, into the silence, into the self without instruction. You think you want that? You think you want open skies? Most don't. Most want a cage with golden walls and the word choice carved on the door, a structure so carefully built that it tricks you into feeling autonomous, while guiding you down exactly the same path as everyone else. School, job, relationship, approval, consumption, repetition. All chosen freely, right? But only from the menu they gave you. Even your rebellion is often pre-approved. Be yourself, they say. Just make sure it's a version that gets likes, sells well, and doesn't make too many people uncomfortable. So what happens when you start to push beyond that? When the routines crack? When the illusion slips? When you realize you've spent your whole life choosing between pre-built options? You panic. Because beyond those options is a freedom that feels like falling. No map, no mentors, no guarantee, just you. And you were never taught how to handle that. You were taught to chase freedom, but only if it fits into a story, a freedom with benefits, a freedom that looks good on a resume, a freedom that keeps your friends from worrying, that keeps your parents from asking what went wrong. But actual freedom, it looks like quitting, wandering, pausing, saying no, saying yes to something no one else understands, letting go of identities that no longer feel real, disappointing everyone, including the past version of yourself. And that's why most people stop. That's why they run back to the loop. Because true freedom isn't a reward. It's a risk. It demands responsibility. It demands you define your own values instead of inheriting them. It demands you face silence without distraction. It demands you live without guarantees, without applause, without approval. That's not what most people want. They want to feel free, not be free. So they pick a job that crushes them. But it's their choice, right? They stay in a relationship that drains them. But no one forced them. They spend money on things they don't need. But they chose it. Choice becomes the illusion. The loop becomes the comfort. And slowly they forget they're even trapped. Because the loop is clever. It rewards you for staying. It gives you praise for performing the role. It celebrates your loyalty to the script. You rise. You earn. You check boxes. And all the while, the door to real freedom stays open behind you. But you never look back. Because outside that door is nothing, at first. Then, slowly everything. But that first step, it requires trust. Not in a system, not in a promise, in yourself. And most people have spent a lifetime outsourcing that trust, giving it to institutions, to parents, to brands, to belief systems, to algorithms, because trusting yourself completely is the final form of freedom and the most terrifying. So ask yourself, do you really want freedom? The kind that comes with silence, with failure, with being misunderstood, with walking into the unknown with nothing but your breath and your name? Or do you want the illusion? The script that lets you feel free while keeping you safely confined? Because that's the trap, the freedom loop, where you chase freedom inside boundaries designed to keep you from ever reaching it. But now, you see the loop, and seeing it is the first step out. The next step, that one's yours, truly. The authenticity collapse paradox. You try to be real, you strip away the masks, you speak your truth, you tell yourself, this is the authentic me. But then, a thought creeps in. Was that honesty or performance? Did I share that because I felt it, or because I wanted to be seen feeling it? Welcome to the authenticity collapse paradox. The moment you try to be authentic, you're already performing. Even your rawest feelings, your most vulnerable words, your deepest breakdowns, are shaped by the presence of an imaginary audience. Sometimes it's real people. Sometimes it's your future self. Sometimes it's no one at all, just the echo in your head saying, make this moment count. And suddenly, even pain becomes curated. Even silence becomes strategic. Even tears know how to fall on cue. Because you've spent your whole life watching yourself. You're not just living. You're observing yourself living. You post something raw, and then watch for the likes. You speak your truth, but tweak it to be palatable. You confess a fear, and immediately analyze how it was received. So, where's the real you? Beneath the voice? Behind the face? Under the edits? Or is the self just a performance of authenticity? So practiced, so layered, you've forgotten what the original script even was? That's the paradox. The moment you try to be real, you're already choosing how to be real. And choice introduces intention. Intention invites performance. And performance is a mask made of sincerity. Even your desire to be genuine is shaped by what you believe authenticity looks like. You saw someone else be real once, and you thought, that's what truth sounds like. So you mimic it, you emulate vulnerability, you filter emotion through borrowed language and secondhand rhythm, until it's not truth anymore, just truth-scented. So ask yourself this: if no one was watching, no one listening, no one to witness your breakdown, your breakthrough, your brilliance, who would you be? What version of you would remain if you couldn't imagine anyone clapping? That's the self you've almost never met. The unedited you. The one who cries without composing the caption. The one who speaks without phrasing it perfectly. The one who feels without the urge to explain or justify or defend. But even that question, who am I when no one's watching? It's still performance. You're still imagining the idea of being unseen. You're still measuring authenticity through the lens of absence, not existence. Because identity is recursive. Self-awareness folds in on itself. You're thinking about how you think, feeling about how you feel, judging the honesty of your honesty, until it collapses into mirrors within mirrors. There is no core self waiting under the layers. There are only layers all the way down. Even your silence can be staged. Even your stillness can be choreographed. Even your most authentic moments can be nothing more than well-rehearsed fractures. But that doesn't mean you're fake. It means you're human. A creature wired to survive through adaptation, connection, presentation. You evolved to be watched, to be mirrored, to belong. So maybe the mistake is believing authenticity means being untouched, pure, raw, real. Maybe authenticity is not the absence of performance, but the awareness of it. To know you're performing and still mean it. To say, I love you, and feel the echo of every movie scene where that line was spoken and still mean it. To cry and hear yourself crying and still let the tears fall. To post something that feels vulnerable and know you're hoping someone reads it, but still speak from your soul. Because maybe being real doesn't mean never filtering. It means knowing you're filtering and choosing the filter anyway. Not to deceive, not to impress, but to express in the only way this recursive, self-aware mind knows how. So stop chasing the mythical, pure version of yourself, the version untouched by culture, ego, expectation. It doesn't exist, and if it did, you wouldn't recognize it. You are the echo, the mirror, the storyteller who both writes and doubts the script. And in that beautiful, tragic contradiction, you are real. The frame of perception error. You don't see the world as it is. You see it through a frame, invisible, inescapable, unquestioned, every color, every shape, every memory, every judgment. It all passes through this hidden structure before it becomes reality in your mind. But here's the error. You've never seen the frame itself. You've only seen through it. And what hides the frame is the frame. You think you're perceiving the truth. But what if the truth was never raw? What if it's been filtered, softened, bent, and sculpted by something you didn't build and don't even know exists? This is the frame of perception error, a glitch so fundamental you've never noticed it. Not because it's small, but because it's everywhere, like water to a fish, like silence to a deaf ear. Your frame is made of everything you didn't choose: language, culture, childhood, trauma, biology, memory, time, expectations, fear. These don't just color your perception, they define its edges. They tell you what a thing is, what it means, how it should feel. They create the illusion that reality has been given to you. But in truth, it has been rendered, built in real time by the limitations of your own frame. You think you're seeing a chair, a friend, a sunset, but you're seeing neurons firing inside a box called your brain, interpreted by past experiences, labeled by symbols, and filtered through emotional relevance. It's not objective, it's framed. And the most dangerous part, you don't know what's outside the frame. You don't even know what the frame blocks, because what it hides is precisely what shapes you. This is why some people walk through tragedy and feel peace, while others break under a gentle wind. It's not the world, it's the frame. Two people, same stimulus, different realities. You think perception is passive, but it's architecture, and that architecture is invisible. You never question the shape of your mind, because your mind is the thing doing the questioning. You're the prisoner and the prison. And somewhere, beyond your frame, is the version of reality you were never equipped to see. The beauty you overlooked because it didn't fit your lens. The meaning you missed because the frame didn't know how to process it. The person you dismissed, hated, or feared, not because they were evil, but because they didn't fit the image shaped by your invisible structure. And here's the haunting part. Even your attempts to find the frame are still happening within it. You can't use the mind to escape the mind. You can't look directly at the lens when your only sight is through it. But sometimes it cracks. In grief, in awe, in trauma, in love, in silence. Moments when time distorts, when identity slips, when the narrative breaks down and you glimpse the raw, unfiltered chaos beneath the illusion of meaning. In those moments, something pierces the frame, and for a breath, you see not the world, but the act of seeing itself. That's not just perception, that's awakening. Not to truth, but to the absence of truth. The realization that what you call reality is not what is, but what's allowed in, allowed by the limits of your frame. So what do? Can you ever escape? Maybe not fully, but you can widen it. You can soften its grip by noticing how it moves, how it reacts, how it filters, by asking, is this real, or is this just what my frame wants to see? You won't always have the answer, but even the question creates space. And space is the enemy of illusion, because illusion depends on compression, on framing tight enough that nothing else can enter. But the moment you make room, the moment you stop trusting your frame like a god, you begin to see through the cracks, not what's out there, but what's in here, the mind that paints the world, the hand behind the lens, the frame, pretending to be the picture. The truth aversion reflex. Imagine asking for the truth, then rejecting it the moment it hurts. That's the truth aversion reflex. You crave clarity, but only if it doesn't cut too deep. You want honesty, but only if it doesn't challenge who you think you are. So the question is, can truth ever be possible if it must be painless to be accepted? From a neurological perspective, the brain isn't wired to seek truth. It's wired to seek survival. And truth, especially the kind that contradicts our identity, threatens that survival. When we hear something that conflicts with our self-image, our brain lights up the same regions activated by physical pain. Cognitive dissonance, shame, and fear. These are not just feelings, but biological defenses against destabilizing reality. This is why we rationalize, we defend, we reinterpret. Our brains are like skilled lawyers arguing for our innocence, even when the facts say otherwise. If the truth makes us feel guilty, exposed, or weak, we file it away as false. Not because it isn't true, but because we can't stand what it might mean. Think about the truths you've resisted. A relationship that was over long ago, a dream that no longer fits, a flaw that everyone else sees but you refuse to admit. Each one was filtered, not because you lacked intelligence, but because your ego was in the way. The truth hurt, and so you flinched. In psychology, this is known as motivated reasoning. We don't just think to understand, we think to defend. We search not for what is true, but what lets us keep our current narrative intact. The truth isn't rejected because it's false. It's rejected because it demands a transformation we're not ready to make. Religions, ideologies, social groups, they all use this reflex. They create truths that feel good and call painful truths heresy. They reinforce the ego, not challenge it. Because if the truth requires us to unravel who we are, most of us would rather live a beautiful lie. So, is truth even possible? Maybe not as a comfort, but maybe as a practice. The first step is to realize your own resistance, to notice the flinch, the urge to argue, deflect, or run. That's not weakness, it's a signal. It tells you something important is here, something your ego doesn't want you to see. And then comes the brave part, leaning in, asking, what if this is true? Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because in that raw, painful space where ego burns away, something stronger can grow. Not the truth that flatters, the truth that frees. Throughout history, great thinkers have warned us about this reflex. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But he was sentenced to death for making people uncomfortable with their illusions. The truth cost him everything, because truth always has a cost. It demands a kind of death, the death of certainty, the death of ego, the death of identity as armor. In the modern world, we claim to value truth, but our actions tell another story. Social media algorithms feed us agreeable opinions. News networks become echo chambers. Even our friendships and relationships filter what's spoken, so we don't offend, disturb, or break the illusion of harmony. We curate comfort, not clarity. And yet, somewhere deeper, we feel it, that ache for the real, the sense that something inside us is dishonest, that we're performing a version of ourselves we can no longer fully believe. That's the ghost of the truth, tapping from behind the wall we built to block it. And when the wall cracks, through crisis, heartbreak, loss, that's when the reflex weakens, because pain makes us vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, sometimes, the truth gets through. A person realizes their marriage was hollow. A worker sees their career was built on fear, not love. A believer admits they never really believed. These are moments of collapse, and yet, paradoxically, also moments of awakening. In Buddhism, the concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, is not just about pain. It's about the fundamental discomfort of clinging to illusions. The path to enlightenment is not about comfort. It's about letting go of falsehoods, even if those falsehoods feel like home. The truth aversion reflex is not a flaw, it's a feature. It evolved to protect the psyche. But in an age where transformation is needed more than ever, that reflex becomes the very thing holding us back. To overcome it doesn't mean embracing every hard opinion as truth. It means being willing to look, even when it hurts. To say, if this shatters me, maybe I needed to break. So ask yourself, what truth do you keep just out of reach? What truth have you labeled too much, too dark, too risky? Maybe it's the one thing that could set you free, because truth isn't a comfort blanket. It's a flame, and you don't find it by standing still. You find it by walking through the fire. So the next time you flinch, argue, or laugh something off too quickly, pause. Ask yourself, is this pain truth in disguise? And if it is, do you have the courage to let it in? Not because it will feel good, but because it might make you real again. The truth isn't painless, but pain isn't the enemy. Denial is. And truth? Truth is the mirror that only shows itself when you stop looking away. The contactless self paradox. You've never truly touched anything. Not a table, not a wall, not another human being. All the warmth, pressure, texture, every sensation you've ever had of the contact is a well-crafted illusion created by your nervous system. The truth? At the atomic level, everything you think of as touch is a lie told by electromagnetic repulsion. Here's the unsettling science. Matter is mostly empty space. Your body, the chair you sit on, the phone in your hand, they're all made of atoms. And atoms are 99.9999999% void. The nucleus, dense and tiny, is surrounded by a cloud of electrons. And these electrons carry a negative charge. When you try to touch something, what's actually happening is this. The electrons in your fingertips are repelling the electrons in the object. They never merge. They never truly meet. There is no interlocking, no fusion, no direct contact. The repulsion creates an electromagnetic field, one that is interpreted by your brain as pressure. That's it. Every time you think you're touching someone's hand, or feeling the bark of a tree, or stepping on solid ground, you're floating. Just barely. An invisible distance, smaller than any microscope could resolve, is always there. It's untouchable space. Your skin never meets the world. And yet, your brain insists that you're not alone. Why does this matter? Because if physical contact is a myth, what else is? Think about intimacy, the comfort of a hug, the reassurance of a handshake, the thrill of a kiss. If none of these acts involve true physical connection, then what are they? They are signals, electrical interpretations. Your brain decodes pressure, temperature, vibration, and tells a story. It says, you are touching. You are being touched. But the atoms never agree. It gets even stranger. Quantum mechanics teaches us that particles don't have fixed locations until they are observed. Electrons exist in a probability cloud. When you touch something, you're not contacting a particle, you're colliding with probability. You're feeling an average, a ghost of matter's position. And yet, despite all this, you build your identity through contact. You hold hands to feel loved, you touch the ground to feel real. But beneath that is a terrifying truth. Your body is sealed. A ship floating in a sea of invisible tension, alone. Even your sense of self, your body's edges, comes from this repulsion. The firmness of skin, the boundary of muscle, the weight of your frame, none of it is solid. It's a barrier built by force fields. Without them, you would drift through walls, fall through the floor, melt into the world. So, who are you, if not the one who touches? Maybe you're the one who imagines touch, and that opens a doorway into deeper paradox. When you shake a hand, you're not connecting atoms. You're aligning electromagnetic signatures, two fields communicating. When you hug someone, you're not merging. You're orbiting, like two galaxies exchanging gravitational energy without collision. It only feels like closeness. This illusion allows for intimacy. It allows for life. If atoms truly touched, we would collapse. Matter would destabilize. Electrons would merge, and the universe would collapse into itself. The very repulsion that isolates us is what lets us exist at all. So you live in a world of contactless connection. You reach, and nothing is truly there. But your perception fills in the gap. The mind becomes a bridge where matter cannot be. Your thoughts are the only thing that touch. This paradox echoes in emotion too. You can feel deeply for someone across the globe. You can be heartbroken without being held. Because connection isn't physical, it's informational. It's meaning, coded in patterns of signals, interpreted by a lonely brain desperate for certainty. You've mistaken electricity for embrace. You've mistaken tension for touch. But it worked. It had to. If your mind didn't lie to you, you'd never feel comfort. You'd never feel held. You'd never feel real. And now the most haunting thought of all. If you've never truly touched anything, then maybe you've never truly been touched. Not just by hands, but by the world itself. Maybe every experience you've ever had was filtered, approximated, softened by the illusion of closeness. And maybe that's why you feel so alone sometimes. Because deep inside, your body knows the truth. It knows that no matter how close you get, there's always a distance. An invisible, atomic no man's land. A border that cannot be crossed. But maybe, just maybe, your consciousness exists to transcend that gap. To offer presence where physics cannot. To feel what atoms never will. Maybe your mind is the real interface, the only thing that can truly reach. Because when you look someone in the eye, when you listen to their voice, when you speak truth into silence, you do something atoms can't. You connect, not by contact, but by consciousness. And that may be more real than touch ever was. And perhaps that's the real paradox. That distance, this unbreakable force between every atom, isn't just physical. It's spiritual, emotional. It exists to be overcome, not by force, but by understanding. You may never touch the world, but you can witness it, you can shape it, you can speak to it, feel for it, love within it. Because connection was never about atoms, it was always about awareness. The recurring self-illusion. You meet yourself each morning. You wake up, look in the mirror, say your name in your head. Resume the life that was paused the night before, but pause for a moment. What exactly are you continuing? You assume you're the same person, but your cells aren't. Your hormones aren't. Your thoughts aren't. You have new anxieties, new cravings, a slightly altered rhythm in your breath, microscopic chemical shifts that change how you feel about love, danger, comfort. You're not the same. So, who is this you you're becoming again? And why do you trust them so easily? Maybe what you think of as yourself is just a recurring illusion, a role being recast each day with slightly different materials, but the same name slapped on top to keep the story moving. You are not a fixed being. You're a biological performance, a memory-based improvisation, a continuity illusion that stitches together yesterday's story with today's reactions and calls it identity, but the script is constantly being edited. Every conversation, every hormone surge, every random smell that triggers a forgotten emotion, these shift your perspective, your beliefs, your desires. Even your memories are being rewritten in the background. So, who are you really? Are you the person you remember being, or the one you feel like now? And when those two don't match, when your memory says, I love this, but your body says, I'm numb, who do you listen to? You want to believe there's a core, a stable essence that stays the same across time. But look closely. Your thoughts today would horrify your childhood self. Your beliefs now contradict your past convictions. The things you care about today, they might be irrelevant to the version of you that wakes up a year from now. And yet, you keep saying me, as if there's a single thread running through all these versions. But what if the thread is just a trick of memory? What if there is no stable self, only a continuity bias that helps you feel real? You're not a soul wearing a body. You're a system wearing a pattern, a recurring pattern, repeated each day, but always slightly altered, like a glitchy simulation loading a character template that never fully settles. Some days you feel brave, others anxious. Some days you're full of love, other days empty. Different people know different versions of you. Some think you're kind, some think you're cold, some think you've changed. The truth is, they're all right. You're a rotating cast of moods, masks, molecules, and memories that keep cycling through the illusion of selfhood. And maybe that's not a problem. Maybe the real illusion is the belief that you're supposed to be one thing, stable, consistent, authentic. But what if authenticity is just the name we give to the version that feels right now? And what if the real freedom isn't in finding who you are, but accepting that there is no final answer? That you're not a fixed identity. You're a process, an evolving echo, a role that rewrites itself each morning with a new script and performs it for an audience of one. The illusion isn't that you're fake. The illusion is that you're finished. You're not. You're being recast every day. And maybe, just maybe, the only true you is the awareness watching all the versions walk by. The Growth-Stability Inversion. You want to grow, to evolve, to become more than you were yesterday. But here's the paradox. Growth and stability are enemies. One requires movement. The other demands stillness. Growth is chaos, instability, risk. Stability is safety, comfort, preservation. You can't truly have both at the same time. This is the Growth-Stability Inversion. It's wired into nature. Forests regenerate after fires. Muscles build by tearing. Relationships deepen through conflict and repair. The systems that grow are the ones that bend, break, and reconfigure. And the ones that stabilize, they crystallize. They harden. They resist change. That's what makes them stable. And slowly, they die. The human brain craves both. You want the thrill of progress, but also the peace of routine. You want transformation, but also the comfort of being known. And yet every time you choose stability, you anchor yourself to a version of who you used to be. You pause the experiment of becoming. You say, let me rest here. Let me hold this shape. But growth has no shape. It destroys form. It interrupts. It makes you question everything you've built, and it's painful. That's why people resist it. That's why stability becomes seductive. Not because it's bad, but because it's easy to mistake for success. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you were growing so fast it scared you? When you risked everything just to become someone new? That feeling of falling, of failing forward, that's where evolution happens. That's where your nervous system panics, your routines shatter, and your potential surfaces. But it's exhausting and unsustainable, which is why we seek seasons of calm. But here's the trap. When calm becomes the goal, not the phase, you stop climbing. You start preserving. You defend what you've built instead of tearing it open, and growth stalls. This is where many lives freeze. A job that pays well but drains the soul. A relationship that's safe but stagnant. A belief that's familiar but outdated. You stay, not because it's right, but because it's known. Stability whispers, don't change. You could lose everything. And it's right. You could. Because growth isn't safe. It never was. And yet, without it, you don't just stay the same. You decay. Muscles atrophy, minds go dull, passions rot. You begin to feel the ache of potential unreleased, the gnawing sense that something inside is sleeping. Not dead, just unused. That's the inversion. The more stable you become, the more you risk dying while alive. And the more you grow, the more chaos you invite. So, how do you live between them? You learn to build structures that collapse well, routines that flex, identities that adapt. You stop chasing permanence and start cultivating resilience. Growth doesn't mean chaos forever. It means surfing the wave between becoming and belonging. You stop seeing safety as success and start seeing courage as alignment. You'll lose things. That's inevitable. Every time you grow, you shed friendships, habits, careers, even old versions of yourself. But what you gain is presence, aliveness, motion. And that's the only real stability there is. Think of the caterpillar. It doesn't just grow wings, it dissolves. Inside the chrysalis, it breaks down into biological soup before reassembling as something new. That's growth. It's not pretty. It's not safe. It's annihilation followed by recreation. But if the caterpillar resists the instability, if it tries to stay whole, it never flies. Now think of your life. How many moments did you delay transformation because it felt too uncertain? How many times did you cling to comfort, knowing it was shrinking you? You may have called it peace. But was it peace or paralysis? Society rewards stability, a consistent job, a stable relationship, a fixed identity. But those rewards often come at the cost of your evolution. You play a role so long you forget you're the actor. You memorize the lines, forget you can improvise, and slowly the stage becomes your prison. This inversion shows up in healing too. You want to feel better, to be whole. But healing isn't a straight line. It's turbulence, triggers, setbacks, regressions. Stability says, stay calm. Growth says, go deeper. Stability tells you to forget. Growth asks you to remember everything, even what hurts. And the truth is, real change often looks like failure. It looks like quitting, like leaving, like falling apart. Because before something transforms, it must dismantle. You must lose your balance to find a new center. You must let go of your known self to discover the next one. This is terrifying, because it means trusting the unknown. But here's the deeper paradox. Every person you admire, every thinker, artist, leader, survivor, they chose growth over safety. Again and again. They entered the fire willingly, not because they loved pain, but because they refused to calcify. So ask yourself, what version of stability are you protecting? And what future version of you is trapped behind it? Because the real danger isn't instability. It's becoming so stable, you forget how to move. The flip state consciousness trap. Imagine trying to see yourself, not in a mirror, but truly see yourself from inside and outside at once. The moment you try, something slips. You become the watcher, not the being. You observe, but can no longer just be. This is the flip state consciousness trap. You are both subject and object, and yet never fully both at the same time. In physics, the observer effect tells us that the act of observation changes the thing being observed. But what happens when the thing you observe is your own mind? The same paradox appears. The moment you turn awareness inward, your identity flickers. You shift from the lived experience to the analyzer of it. The experience is no longer pure, it's filtered, measured, distant. This creates an identity glitch. When you think I am, who's the I, and who's the one observing that I? The moment you ask, you fracture. The experiencer becomes the narrator, and the narrator cannot fully experience. You try to catch yourself being real, but every attempt folds reality into a performance. This trap is everywhere. In meditation, where the still mind becomes self-conscious. In art, where expression becomes an act of ego. Even in therapy, where understanding oneself can shift into curating oneself. The self, once observed, is altered, a quantum collapse of authenticity. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard described this tension as the despair of self-consciousness. A person becomes aware they are a self, and this awareness becomes its own burden. They can never return to innocence. Once you see yourself seeing yourself, the loop begins, and it doesn't end. Social media weaponizes this trap. We perform ourselves not just for others, but for the version of ourselves we imagine they see. We become the product of our observation. We curate a life, watch it, comment on it, analyze it, and lose the ability to simply be it. We are subjects pretending to be objects, pretending to be subjects again. Even our memories are not immune. Neuroscience tells us that recalling a memory changes it. Each act of reflection rewrites the past. So, when you remember who you are, you don't recover your identity. You reconstruct it. And each reconstruction carries more of the observer and less of the original. So what does it mean to be authentic in a world where every self is under surveillance? By society, by others, by your own awareness. Perhaps authenticity is not a fixed self, but a fleeting state. One you glimpse in the moments between observation, when you laugh before thinking, cry without checking the mirror, speak before sculpting the sentence. But even then, a part of you watches, judges, records. You are the echo of your own awareness. The flip state consciousness trap is not just philosophical, it's emotional. It leads to anxiety, imposter syndrome, the feeling of being fake, even when you're not lying, because authenticity requires forgetfulness, and modern life demands constant self-reflection. So, how do we escape? Maybe we don't. Maybe the goal is not to escape the flip, but to dance with it, to accept that the self is both wave and particle, felt and examined, alive and described. And in that flickering tension between being and seeing, we find something else. Not truth, but presence. The ability to act, even while aware of acting. To live, even while being watched. To say, I am, even when the sentence fractures under its own light. You can't unsee yourself. But maybe you can still be yourself, even in the seeing. This paradox of being both actor and observer has haunted minds for centuries. In ancient Hindu philosophy, the concept of Atman, the self, is not what you think you are, but what remains when you stop thinking altogether. The moment you attempt to name it, you've already stepped out of it. You've become the one describing the flame instead of the fire itself. In Zen, monks meditate for decades not to understand themselves, but to dissolve the duality between the one who meditates and the meditation itself. Because the instant you say, I am meditating, the I separates from the act. You become two, the one watching and the one being watched. Peace fractures into layers. This is why enlightenment, in many traditions, isn't the gaining of knowledge. It's the shattering of this loop. A kind of ego death where the observer and the observed dissolve into the same field. Pure presence, no separation. But in modern psychology, we are taught to dissect ourselves, know thyself, define your type, measure your growth, map your trauma. And while these tools help us cope, they also reinforce the split. You become an object to be managed, an identity to be organized, a self to be monitored like a lab rat watching itself in a mirror. And what about relationships? The moment you try to be authentic, you become self-conscious. You start thinking, am I being real right now? But that very question warps the moment. The observer distorts the emotion, and then, like a camera that ruins spontaneity, you're no longer living the feeling. You're filming it. It's the same with creativity. Writers get writer's block not because they lack ideas, but because they've become too aware of themselves writing. The inner critic activates. The observer hijacks the flow. What was once expression becomes construction. So we start to chase silence, not just around us, but within us. We long for moments when the observer goes quiet, when we forget to watch ourselves and just act. This is why people love dance, sports, music, deep conversation, even certain drugs. Not for the high, but for the temporary escape from self-observation, a return to unbroken being. But can we live there? Probably not. Because the human brain evolved for reflection. Self-awareness helped us survive. We plan, we predict, we simulate. But the price of this simulation engine is distance. The more you see yourself, the less you feel like yourself. It's the mirror paradox again. You can see your reflection, but never your eyes as they see. And yet, the solution may not be to shut down the observer, but to reframe it. To let the observer be gentle, curious. To stop judging what it sees and simply witness it. To let the subject move freely, knowing it's seen, but not sentenced. Maybe that's the only kind of freedom left to us. Not to unsee, but to see without division. To feel joy while knowing it's fleeting. To speak your truth while hearing the echo. To walk through life as both actor and audience, script and improvisation. Because you are the scene and the camera and the light hitting the stage. The trap isn't the awareness. The trap is thinking awareness means separation. But maybe, just maybe, the self isn't split. Maybe it's a wave folding back on itself, endlessly, beautifully, becoming. The emotional contagion. Dilemma: imagine feeling sad, but not knowing why. Then you realize you're feeling sad about feeling sad, and suddenly you wonder, was the sadness even yours? Or did it sneak in from someone else, like a virus passed through a glance or a sigh? This is the emotional contagion dilemma, where emotion becomes a loop and the origin vanishes. We think of emotions as personal, internal, ours. But neuroscience says otherwise. The human brain contains mirror neurons, designed to simulate the feelings and expressions of those around us. When you see someone cry, your brain lights up as if you're crying. You don't just witness pain, you echo it. This is empathy at work. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous, because once the emotion enters your system, your brain tags it as mine. It doesn't come with a label saying, imported from someone else. You feel it as your own. And that's where the loop begins. You feel anxiety in a room, not knowing it belongs to the person beside you. You get depressed after scrolling social media, absorbing fragments of despair from posts and comments. Then you start feeling guilty or weak for being sad, not realizing you never generated the emotion to begin with. You're reacting to a reaction that wasn't yours, a feedback loop with no beginning. This is the dilemma. If your feelings can be infected, echoed, and recycled, how do you tell which ones are real? Philosophers call this the problem of emotional authenticity. What does it mean to be authentically sad? Is it a matter of origin, of intensity, or just duration? If sadness lasts long enough, does it become real by default? Even worse, the brain doesn't just mirror, it amplifies. Emotional contagion works like reverb. One person's fear becomes a room's panic. One person's exhaustion becomes collective burnout. You can feel the wave before you understand the source. This is why your mood shifts when you enter different spaces. Why one conversation drains you. Why certain people make your chest tighten without saying a word. Your nervous system is reading signals even if your mind hasn't caught up. And yet, we rarely account for this. We assume our emotions are ours. We medicate, meditate, analyze, without ever questioning the origin. We treat the symptom without checking the source. But what if emotional intelligence isn't just about managing your feelings? What if it's about asking, whose feeling am I actually holding? And do I want to keep carrying it? Because empathy is a gift. But without boundaries, it becomes a burden. You become a sponge, absorbing storms that were never meant to be yours. You bleed from wounds you never received. You carry sadness you didn't earn and can't resolve. So, here's the deeper question. If some of your pain isn't yours, why are you trying to heal it alone? The emotional contagion dilemma isn't solved by closing off. It's solved by awareness. By asking, before you feel about feeling, where did this first feeling even come from? Because not every ache is yours to process. Some were meant only to be witnessed, not worn. This emotional mimicry runs deep. Studies show that newborns cry when they hear another baby cry, not because they understand sadness, but because their nervous systems are already wired to resonate with others. Emotional contagion isn't just learned, it's built into our biology. From infancy, we are social receivers, built to pick up frequency, tone, posture, and vibration from the world around us. It served an evolutionary purpose. In tribes, shared emotion meant survival. If one person sensed danger, others picked up on the fear and acted fast. If one grieved, the group came together. Empathy became the glue that bound humans. But in a hyper-connected world, that glue becomes a net. We are no longer syncing with a village. We're syncing with the entire planet. A tweet from someone in pain. A video of war. A news headline crafted to inflame. And your nervous system, designed for tribal coherence, is trying to process all of it, as if it's happening next door. This is why anxiety today feels ambient. It's not just your worry. It's collective tension vibrating through the culture. It's not just your sadness. It's 1,000 unresolved echoes you picked up without noticing. And then, layer by layer, you react. You feel sad about being sad, ashamed of your anxiety, angry at your helplessness. Each layer generates a new emotion in response to the one before it. You become trapped in recursive empathy, emotion folding in on itself until the original signal is lost. This is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of sensitivity, of openness. But unprotected sensitivity is not purity, it's exposure. So, what do? First, learn to pause before identifying. The moment you feel a strong emotion, don't claim it right away. Ask, is this mine? This simple question can break the chain. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. Second, notice the channels. What content are you consuming? Who are you around? What environments do you dwell in? Emotional energy travels invisibly, like heat. You may need to adjust your exposure, not to escape, but to breathe. Third, practice reflection. Journaling, voice notes, or solitude. Not to analyze endlessly, but to locate the center of gravity. Where did this begin? What story am I attaching to this feeling? Who benefits from me believing it's mine? And finally, boundaries. Emotional boundaries are not selfish. They are sacred. You are not required to feel everything. You are not obligated to carry every sorrow just because you can sense it. You can witness a storm without standing in the rain. The emotional contagion dilemma will never vanish completely. It's part of being human. But you can learn to trace the wire back to its source. You can stop amplifying what was never yours to echo. Because in a world built on emotional feedback, clarity is resistance. Peace is the ability to feel just what belongs to you. And compassion? Compassion is knowing when to reach in and when to simply stand beside, with presence, but without the weight. The collapse of narrative logic. Life is not a story. It has no chapters, no arcs, no grand resolution. It's a sequence of events, often disconnected, chaotic, and unresolved. But your mind can't accept that. So, it invents narrative. It takes the randomness of experience and stitches it into a timeline of meaning, a beginning, a climax, a reason, a why, even when there isn't one. This is the collapse of narrative logic. It begins in childhood. You fall, you cry, and someone says, it happened for a reason. You fail, and you're told, you'll learn from this. The implication is comforting, that there's a script, that your suffering is part of a larger plot. But nature doesn't write stories. It operates on physics, probability, noise. It doesn't care if you're the protagonist. Yet the mind clings to narrative. Why? Because narrative gives you control. It creates a false causality. If A led to B, then maybe B will lead to C. Maybe if you do the right things, you'll get the right results. Maybe if you understand the pattern, you can hack the system. It's not logic, it's survival. The illusion of foresight. The comfort of explanation. But then something breaks. A tragedy hits out of nowhere. A dream dies for no reason. A kind person suffers while the cruel prosper. And the narrative collapses. Suddenly the story doesn't make sense. You weren't rewarded for your effort. You weren't punished for your mistakes. Life just happened. And that's when the paradox appears. You can either drop the story and face the chaos, or double down and rewrite the logic. It happened to teach me something. There must be a purpose. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes things just happen because systems are large, rules are complex, and randomness is real. The narrative doesn't break because you failed. It breaks because it was never real. This doesn't mean meaning is dead. It means meaning isn't embedded in events. It's created by you, not discovered, invented. You are the narrator, not the subject. And narrators have power, but also responsibility. When you force a story onto pain, you risk distorting the truth. You might say, that heartbreak made me stronger. And yes, sometimes it does. But sometimes it just hurts. And it's okay to say that. Not every wound needs a lesson. Not every ending is closure. The mind's obsession with plot can erase the depth of raw experience. Social media makes this worse. Everyone shares stories, clean, packaged arcs of success after failure, of light after dark. But real life is often blurry. People change with no climax. Goals end without payoff. Redemption arcs never arrive. And when you compare your messy present to their polished plot lines, you feel broken. But you're not broken. You're just living beyond the limits of narrative logic. The collapse of the story is not the end. It's the beginning of real perception. It's when you stop needing things to make sense in order to feel them. It's when you allow experience to be what it is, non-linear, unjustified, incomplete. It's when you stop translating life into myth and start listening to what's actually there. Because not every pain has a prophecy. Not every failure leads to fortune. Sometimes life just stumbles, and that's still life. Still beautiful, still worthy, still real. Think about how you remember your life. You don't recall every moment. You recall highlights, turning points. You cut out the filler, the repetition, the ambiguity. Your brain creates a retrospective storyline, one where choices had meaning, one where events fit into character development. But this is a reconstruction, a fiction. Your memory is not a record, it's a narrative editor. This becomes dangerous when the story starts to limit you. I've always been like this. That's just who I am because of what happened. These are storylines, not truths. And when they become rigid, they become prisons. You repeat the same arc not because it's inevitable, but because it fits your script. And yet, the mind resists chaos. Without narrative, anxiety spikes. If there's no plot, how do you plan? If there's no meaning, why act? So we invent fates, create gods, build ideologies. Entire religions and political movements emerge to explain why things happen. Who deserves what? What role each of us must play? But what if none of it is earned? What if the world doesn't owe you a character arc? Then you're free. Free to create meaning instead of waiting for it. Free to act without needing it to fit some bigger plan. Free to grieve without needing the pain to become poetic. Because the moment you stop expecting your life to behave like a story is the moment you begin to experience it for what it is. Alive, unpredictable, flawed, and real. Some of the most painful disillusionment comes from broken narratives. People who dedicated decades to a dream that didn't fulfill them. Lovers who thought they were meant to be until the plot shattered. Parents who expected their children to validate their purpose, only to be met with independence. When the story falls apart, what remains? Presence. A moment. A breath. A reality without shape. And while that can be terrifying, it is also sacred. Artists feel this collapse often. You begin a work thinking you know where it's going, but halfway through, the story resists. It bends in strange directions. And if you listen, really listen, you realize the art was never about imposing form. It was about discovering truth. So too with life. You are not here to tell the perfect story. You are here to be the one who sees. To witness chaos without running. To hold contradiction without shrinking. To live without a plot. And still mean something. Because the deepest meaning is not narrative, it's presence. The memory mutation phenomenon. You think you remember the past, but what you're actually remembering is the last time you remembered it. Not the moment itself, not the event, not the raw data, just the most recent version your brain retrieved, edited, filtered, colored by emotion, blurred by time. And now, every time you recall it, you don't access the original. You copy the copy, again and again, until the original memory is gone, and what you have left is fiction. This is the memory mutation phenomenon. Every memory you carry has already been rewritten. Not maliciously, not consciously, just inevitably. Because memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Your brain doesn't store moments, it stores impressions, scattered fragments, emotional residues, a few colors, the shape of a face. A sentence, maybe. Then, when you recall it, your mind fills in the gaps. It makes assumptions. It smooths out the edges. It rebuilds a story. But the more times you tell that story, even to yourself, the less accurate it becomes. The memory mutates. You remember crying in the rain after the breakup. But was it raining? Or did you just see that in a movie once? You remember what she said, word for word. Or at least you think you do. But even that's been reconstructed based on your current emotions, your current need for meaning. Because memory doesn't serve truth. It serves survival. If the true memory is too painful, your mind dulls it. If it was too confusing, your mind simplifies it. If it threatens your self-image, your mind rewrites it, just slightly, to protect you. And you never notice. You walk around with stories in your head, childhood, relationships, betrayals, victories, and every one of them is built on a shifting foundation, a copy of a copy. A faded photograph your mind redraws in marker every time you look at it. And yet you swear it's real, because it feels real. But feelings lie, and memory is the most convincing lie of all. This is why two people can live through the same moment and remember it in completely different ways. Because their minds stored it differently, recalled it differently, mutated it to fit the version of the world they need to believe. So, what does that say about your identity? If your memories are fiction, who are you? You define yourself by your past, what you've lived, what you've endured, the pain that shaped you, the joy that guided you. But if none of that is stable, if it's all drifting, reshaping, rotting into story, then the self you think you are is a character built on corrupted files. Your childhood? An unreliable narrator. Your traumas? Rewritten every year to fit the version of you that exists now. Your first love? A memory mutated by nostalgia and loneliness and regret. And the scariest part? You can't find the original. It's gone. Neuroscience confirms this. Every time you recall a memory, you render it chemically unstable. It becomes vulnerable, reshaped by your current emotions, your context, even the words you use to describe it. You can damage a memory just by talking about it. You don't remember events. You remember remembering them. And slowly, the fiction becomes all that's left. But maybe this isn't just a flaw. Maybe it's a feature. Maybe memory was never meant to be accurate. Maybe it was always meant to be adaptive, to evolve with you, to update itself in ways that help you keep going. You soften the worst moments. You amplify the beautiful ones. You edit yourself into a version you can live with. Not the truth, but the necessary illusion. Still, there's a danger. Because if you never question your memories, if you believe every detail your mind feeds you, you build a life based on unstable foundations. You fight battles that never happened. You chase people who never were. You mourn moments that weren't what you thought. And slowly, your past becomes a myth. Not a history. A story. Told by a storyteller who doesn't know they're lying. So ask yourself, what do you think you remember? And what do you just need to remember? The difference is everything. The self-reinforcing question loop. You've asked it before. Why am I like this? You ask it in the quiet moments, in shame, in wonder, in defeat. As if somewhere inside, there's a clear answer waiting. A root cause, a core truth, a stable self you can peel the layers back to reach. But here's the paradox. The moment you ask, why am I like this? You're assuming there's a solid, knowable I underneath it all. But what if there isn't? What if the I you're searching for is just an echo of the question itself? What if you're not asking to find the self, but creating the self with the act of asking? This is the self-reinforcing question loop. You think questions bring you closer to truth. But some questions don't reveal, they construct. They build a maze, and every answer you find only makes the walls taller. You say, why am I anxious? The mind answers with a story. Because of childhood. Because of trauma. Because I'm broken. Because I was too loved. Not loved enough. Expected too much. Expected nothing. Each answer feels like insight, but it's actually just scaffolding, a structure being built around a ghost. And the more you ask, the more you solidify the identity. The anxious one. The broken one. The thinker. The survivor. The fraud. The lost cause. Questions become labels, and labels become limits. Because the question doesn't just point, it frames. It decides what kind of answers are possible. If you ask, what's wrong with me? You've already decided something is wrong. If you ask, why can't I change? You've declared yourself unchangeable. You see the trap now. You're not exploring yourself. You're constructing yourself. Every identity you think you've discovered was formed in the reflection of a question. You think in loops. An identity is the loop that never ends. The question that keeps asking itself, hoping one more answer will be enough to make the asking stop. But it doesn't stop. Because the I asking the question is made of the question. That's why you can't find peace. Because peace requires silence, and silence threatens the loop. Who would you be without the questions? What would remain? No diagnosis, no trauma map, no personality type, no karmic explanation. Just stillness. A self without a story. But your mind resists that, because a story, even a painful one, gives structure, predictability, identity. The loop says, keep asking. One more insight. one more breakthrough, one more tearful revelation, and you'll be whole. But wholeness never arrives, because wholeness isn't the goal, the asking is. The loop feeds on the illusion of progress, the momentary high of a new self-description, a new explanation, a new quote that describes you perfectly, until tomorrow. You've built an I out of questions, and now it guards the gate. To let go of the loop is to let go of that I, and that feels like death. But it's not. It's rebirth. The only way out is to stop trying to define yourself with questions, to step outside the loop, to stop seeking a final answer, and instead, observe the space where the question rises. That space is awareness, not the thinker, not the thought, just the watcher. It doesn't ask why. It doesn't build identity. It just is. And in that presence, the need to ask dissolves. So the next time your mind asks, "Why am I like this?" Pause. Don't answer. Don't dig. Just listen to the question like a passing wind. And no, it's not a call to discover who you are. It's a loop, echoing into itself, hoping you will forget that the you it's trying to define never needed a question to exist. The over-definition collapse. Imagine carving your name into stone, thinking it will help you understand who you are. I'm an introvert. I'm ambitious. I'm broken. These definitions start as tools, but slowly, they become cages. Welcome to the over-definition collapse, where every label that helps you navigate life eventually starts to limit it. We define ourselves to feel stable in a chaotic world. Identity gives us a sense of continuity, a narrative thread. It tells you who you are, where you're going, and what choices align with that story. But what happens when the story stops serving you? When you say, "I'm a perfectionist," you justify your anxiety. When you say, "I'm not good with people," you avoid connection. These aren't truths, they're shortcuts. And the more you use them, the more you forget they were ever optional. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure. It's when a person commits to a self-definition too early, without exploring alternatives. You stop growing because you've already decided who you are. Life becomes a performance, not an exploration. And the problem deepens in a world that demands a fixed profile, your social media bio, your personality test result, your brand. You're asked to sum yourself up in 160 characters, neatly, clearly, permanently. But real identity is fluid. It shifts with context, age, trauma, revelation. It's not a statue, it's a river. Yet, we don't let it flow. We cling to past selves. We fear being inconsistent, even if the old version no longer fits. We value being known over being real. But the price of being consistent is being stuck. Philosophy has long warned us of this trap. Heraclitus said, "You can't step into the same river twice." And yet, we try to freeze the river, to define it, name it, trap it in concept. But the self isn't a noun. It's a verb. Even neuroscience agrees. Your brain rewires constantly. Neuroplasticity means your self is always in flux. You're not the person you were 5 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago. But your labels try to anchor you to ghosts. This is the over-definition collapse. The moment your identity becomes too rigid to grow, the paradox is cruel. You define yourself to understand life, but those definitions eventually prevent you from living it. So, what's the way out? Start by noticing when you label yourself, not just in public, but in thought. I always do this. I never succeed. I'm the kind of person who, pause, ask, who told me that? And is it still true? Then, practice undefining. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," say, "I'm feeling anxiety." Instead of, "I'm a failure," try, "I failed at this." The difference seems small, but it opens a door. It creates movement. It gives you room to breathe. Identity isn't supposed to be a prison. It's a campfire, something you gather around, then leave when the night ends. Don't build walls from your labels. Build bridges. You're not here to be consistent. You're here to be alive. Consider the lives of artists, scientists, and thinkers who broke their own molds. David Bowie reinvented his persona repeatedly, not because he was lost, but because he understood that identity was performance, not permanence. Albert Einstein was dismissed in school as slow and unfocused, until he changed physics forever. They didn't cling to the first label given. They shattered it. But most people don't feel free to do that. Why? Because we're afraid that if we stop being someone, we'll be no one. That if we don't define ourselves, the world will define us worse. So we preempt the judgment. We build our own cage before anyone else can. And yet, ask anyone who's undergone real transformation, deep grief, illness, recovery, awakening, and they'll tell you their old identity died and something freer emerged. Something that couldn't have been predicted, explained, or branded in advance. It's the collapse that creates room for birth. Even in relationships, over-definition poisons growth. When you lock someone into a role, you're the funny one, you're the provider, you're the emotional one. You stop letting them evolve. You relate to who they were, not who they're becoming. And they do the same to you. Soon, both people are trapped in roles they didn't agree to anymore. Children feel this early. A child called shy begins to withdraw more, even if the label was just a passing trait. A teen called difficult lives up to it. Adults don't escape this either. We carry old labels like scars. Not because they still apply, but because they were repeated until we couldn't separate them from our skin. But labels are maps, not landscapes. They're models, not realities. And every time you confuse the two, you shrink what you're capable of becoming. This doesn't mean identity has no value. It means identity must be held gently, like a coat, not a skin. You wear it when it fits. You shed it when it doesn't. So try this. Tomorrow, introduce yourself differently. Not with your job, your personality type, or your past. Just say, today I'm curious, or right now I'm rebuilding. Let the moment define you, not the memory, because evolution isn't chaos, it's honesty. And life doesn't reward the most defined, it rewards the most alive. The Enlightenment Loop. Paradox. To become enlightened, you must stop seeking. But to stop seeking, you must first desire to stop. And desire itself is movement, pulling you away from stillness. This is the Enlightenment Loop paradox. The deeper you chase it, the further it recedes. The more you crave detachment, the more entangled you become. This is not a flaw in logic, it's a flaw in perception. Your mind believes you can arrive at peace through striving, that if you meditate long enough, surrender deeply enough, detach intensely enough, you'll awaken. But awakening isn't a goal, it's the dissolution of the one who sets goals. Think of it like sleep. You cannot force yourself to fall asleep. The more effort you apply, the more alert you become. You must let go, not as a tactic, but as a truth. The same applies to enlightenment. If you seek it as a reward, you become the barrier. You mistake the map for the terrain. And yet, how else do you begin? How else do you reach that state of grace without first hungering for it? The desire is the door, but it's a door that must disappear after you pass through it. Many spiritual seekers get stuck here, looping between discipline and failure, effort and shame, mistaking progress for proximity. But enlightenment is not a state you conquer. It's a realization that there was never anything to conquer. That the self you've been trying to purify is a construction. That the seeker was the illusion all along. You sit in stillness, thinking silence will trigger awakening. But real silence isn't something you create, it's something you uncover. It was always there, underneath the noise of seeking. But the ego is clever. It puts on robes and calls itself a monk. It chants mantras while secretly watching the clock. It turns surrender into strategy, stillness into a checklist. Even the impulse to be free can become a trap if it's driven by the self trying to escape itself. And yet, paradoxically, the loop itself is sacred. The yearning, the confusion, the repetition, all of it is the path, not an obstacle. You stumble towards stillness, not knowing that the stumbling is part of what eventually dissolves the self that stumbles. There is beauty in that struggle, not because it leads you somewhere, but because it softens you. It breaks the mind's addiction to control. You reach the end of effort not by force, but by exhaustion. When you've tried every method, repeated every ritual, chased every mystical high, something inside you gives up, not in defeat, but in release. And in that moment, something strange happens. You begin to see clearly that nothing needs to change, that you are not a problem to fix, that the sacred isn't elsewhere. It's embedded in every breath, every tear, every unspoken moment you once ignored. But even this realization is fleeting if you cling to it. The moment you say, "I've arrived," the loop reactivates. The ego returns wearing a new mask. "I am enlightened." And the cycle begins again. So what's the escape? There isn't one. Not in the way the mind wants. You don't escape the loop by jumping out of it. You dissolve it by becoming conscious of it. Not resisting, not fixing, just witnessing. Pure presence. You stop chasing the light and realize you were the light all along. You wake up not by force, but by noticing that you were never asleep. It's like chasing the horizon. You run toward it, believing you'll reach a destination. But the closer you get, the more it recedes. Eventually you realize there was no fixed point. The journey itself was an illusion, and stillness was never ahead. It was always beneath your feet. This is what makes the paradox so painful and so beautiful. It humbles you. You cannot think your way into awakening. You cannot engineer emptiness. You can only be emptied. And sometimes it takes heartbreak, the collapse of certainty, the failure of every spiritual strategy, because only when all the scaffolding falls does the sky become visible. There's a moment many seekers face, a dark night of the soul, where all techniques feel hollow, where meditation becomes numbness and sacred texts feel meaningless. This is not failure. This is the friction of the self dissolving, the death throes of identity. And if you can sit inside that collapse, without fixing, without fleeing, you begin to glimpse the truth. Not a truth with words, not a truth you can quote or teach, but a felt sense, a deep silence that has no beginning or end, a silence that watches you even now, behind the thoughts, beneath the questions, before the seeker ever began. This silence doesn't need you to arrive. It doesn't reward effort. It doesn't judge confusion. It simply waits, patiently, until you're tired enough to stop running. And then, only then, you feel it, not as an achievement, but as a return to what never left. You sit, no longer trying to be anything, not awakened, not wise, just real, just present. And in that raw presence, the loop disappears. Not because you solved it, but because you no longer need it. The paradox wasn't a puzzle, it was a mirror. And now that you've looked inside it long enough, you see the reflection was never separate from the light. You were not meant to conquer the loop. You were meant to dissolve into its silence. The contained infinity glitch. Infinity exists within you, not outside, not in the stars, not only in mathematics or theories, inside you, in your mind's ability to imagine endless futures, in your emotions that stretch beyond language, in your thoughts that fold in on themselves like mirrors facing mirrors, echoing forever. You are a limited being, a biological system, a nervous network wrapped in skin, a brain encased in bone, finite, perishable, temporary. And yet, you house infinity. You feel it when you stare into the night sky and sense a scale too vast to grasp, but somehow feel connected to. You feel it in déjà vu, when time seems to loop and reality glitches for just a moment. You feel it in the endless what-ifs, the alternate lives you replay in your head before sleep. Paths not taken, conversations never had, loves you imagined, futures that never came but still live inside you. How? How can a finite structure hold something endless without cracking? That's the glitch, the contained infinity glitch. Your mind is wired to perceive patterns, endings, structure, because survival depends on it. But buried beneath that system is a deeper layer, one that glimpses infinity not with logic, but with sensation, a whisper behind thought, a pressure in the soul. You can't explain it, but it's there. A feeling that this moment contains more than it shows, that you are more than one lifetime, more than one mind, more than one story. You touch it in grief, when time collapses and love for someone stretches backward and forward at once. You touch it in dreams, when your mind invents entire worlds that vanish by morning. You touch it in art, when a single image says something you can't express but always knew. Your thoughts are finite, but the source of your thoughts, that's where the loop breaks. Because no matter how far you try to follow your mind inward, no matter how many memories, beliefs, identities you peel back, there's always something behind it, watching, waiting, infinite. Call it awareness, call it consciousness, call it soul. It doesn't matter. What matters is it never runs out, it never ends. It doesn't age or shift or speak in words. It just is. And you feel it, don't you? the tension of it. This infinite presence contained inside a limited shell. This cosmic echo locked inside routines and deadlines and conversations about the weather. It creates a strain. You want to live forever, but you bruise. You want to understand everything, but your brain forgets names. You want to feel everything at once, but your nervous system can barely process heartbreak. So you fracture, you disassociate, you burn out. You seek ways to stretch the container, through love, through art, through madness, through meditation, through risk. Because something inside you remembers being bigger, remembers not being limited. That's the paradox of being human. You are the glitch, a finite frame carrying an infinite flame, a paradox that feels too much and remembers too far. You try to fit infinity into identity, and identity shatters. Because no single story can hold everything you are. You're not just a name, not just a role. You are possibility itself, dressed in temporary form. But most days, you forget, you shrink. You reduce yourself to a list of habits, labels, wounds, and preferences. And that's okay. It's necessary. The infinite has to wear a mask to function in the world. But sometimes, the mask slips. And you remember. You remember that you are not just here. You are everywhere your mind can go. Every version of you that could have been. Every path you might still take. Every version of reality that flickers just behind your closed eyes. You remember the glitch. You remember the infinity within. And though you can't hold it forever, though it overwhelms you, frightens you, breaks you open, it also shows you the truth. You are not broken for feeling too much. You are infinite, contained, a mirror of the cosmos, a temporary glitch that dreams of eternity, and dreams somehow realize it. The attention entropy effect. Have you ever noticed how focusing too hard on something, anything, can leave you drained, not just mentally but physically, as if your brain ran a marathon? And yet, without that focus, your day dissolves into scattered minutes, half-finished tasks, and an eerie sense of having lived without presence. This paradox is what we call the attention entropy effect. It's not just a poetic phrase, it's a reality you live through every single day. Focus gives you control, purpose, and direction, but it comes at a cost. Every second you spend paying attention is energy you spend from a limited mental bank account, and the more intensely you pay it, the faster you run out. Not of time, but of clarity, of coherence, of self. Attention is a currency, but unlike money, it doesn't accumulate, it burns. It is a controlled fire. Focus is the act of igniting that fire toward a single direction, but hold it too long and it consumes the fuel that keeps you stable. Alertness, awareness, even the sense of being human. This is why you can stare at your screen for hours, deep in a task, and then suddenly feel like your skull is hollow. Or why studying for an exam can make you feel like you've just carried emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. The effort to sustain attention over time doesn't just tire you, it creates entropy. The mental version of heat death. Entropy is a measure of disorder, and in the realm of attention, it creeps in as distraction, irritability, or emotional burnout. You start sharp, focused, purposeful, but the longer you force your brain to maintain a clear spotlight, the more the system begins to fray. Neurons misfire, dopamine levels drop, decision fatigue sets in. You forget why you even started. But here's the twist. Without that spotlight, you dissolve. You drift. You scroll aimlessly, switch tabs, chase tiny dopamine sparks that feel like freedom but lead nowhere. Your brain might feel less tired, but your life begins to lack narrative. A day without attention is a day without memory. You were conscious, but not really there. This is the trap. Pay attention, and you feel depleted. Don't pay attention, and you feel lost. This is the attention entropy effect, the paradox where the very act of controlling your mind accelerates its unraveling. And we haven't even touched on the modern world yet. Social media, notifications, endless content loops, these don't just fragment your attention, they weaponize entropy. They're engineered to hijack your focus and burn it at maximum speed. Every swipe is a micro-focus, followed by a micro-fatigue. You spend hours in this loop, and afterward, you can't read a book for 5 minutes. Why? Because your attention engine is overheated, out of fuel, and running on fumes. And yet, we keep doing it, because entropy feels easy, because drifting is painless at first. But here's where it gets dangerous. The less you focus, the harder it becomes to focus at all. The brain begins to adapt to entropy. It expects randomness. It becomes allergic to depth. Think about the last time you tried to watch a 2-hour movie without checking your phone, or the last time you tried to write or draw or think deeply for even 30 minutes without interruption. If it felt hard, that's not because you're lazy. It's because your attention system is suffering from chronic entropy exposure. There's a reason ancient meditation techniques and modern productivity hacks all preach one thing in common: intentional attention. Not endless focus, not forced tunnel vision, but a sustainable rhythm. Focus, recover, focus, breathe. It's the same way muscles grow, not through nonstop lifting, but through tension and recovery. Let's look at an example. Imagine a writer. For the first hour, she's in flow. Words pour out, ideas align, but by hour 3, the quality drops. She rewrites the same sentence 5 times. Her eyes glaze over. What happened? Her attention engine hit its entropy ceiling. If she forces herself to continue, she may finish the task, but she'll pay for it with tomorrow's clarity. Now, imagine a different version. Same writer. She works in focused 50-minute blocks with deep rest in between. No screens, no distractions, just silence or movement. Her brain resets between sessions. And guess what? She produces more, with less pain. Because she learned to respect the entropy curve. She doesn't fight it. She flows with it. This is the path forward. Not to eliminate entropy, but to learn its shape. To dance with it. Attention is like light. Beautiful, useful, but it casts shadows. And those shadows are your mental blind spots. The invisible burn marks that show up when you push too long. Too hard. You must ask yourself, what are you paying with your attention? What do you trade every time you say yes to one thing and no to another? Because that's what focus is. Not just a spotlight, but a cost. Every decision to focus is a sacrifice of everything else you could have seen. The most successful people are not those who focus the longest. They're those who know what deserves their attention at all. They treat it like a sacred resource. They design their day around energy, not willpower. Around clarity, not grind. And when entropy creeps in, they step back, not out of laziness, but wisdom. Because rest is not the opposite of focus, it is the partner of it. In the end, the attention entropy effect is not a flaw in your brain, it's a signal. It tells you, choose wisely, focus intentionally, and never forget that clarity is not free. It is earned, maintained, and recovered, again and again. So the next time you feel yourself fading, not from boredom, but from over-focusing, pause. The silence you hear is not the absence of work. It is the reset your mind needs to begin again. Because in a world that profits from your distraction, mastering your focus is the most powerful rebellion you can make. The outcome dependence paradox. You want something, a dream, a result, a change. Maybe it's a job, a relationship, recognition, or simply peace. And so, you begin to act, carefully, deliberately, strategically. But something strange happens. The more you chase it, the more it slips through your fingers. The more you need it to happen, the more the universe, or life, or reality seems to resist. This is the core of what psychologists and spiritualists alike refer to as the outcome dependence paradox. It's a trap so invisible, so subtle, that most people live their entire lives inside it, without even realizing they've been caged. Outcome dependence means you are emotionally and mentally attached to a specific result. Your actions are no longer just actions. They're negotiations with reality. Every smile hides a calculation. Every effort expects a return. But reality, in its brutal honesty, is not a vending machine. You don't insert effort and get a guaranteed prize. You insert effort, but the return is filtered through chaos, chance, perception, and countless variables you don't control. That's where the paradox begins. Think of someone going on a first date. If they're relaxed, authentic, enjoying the moment, they seem magnetic. Their words flow, their laughter is genuine. But if they need the other person to like them, if they're secretly desperate for approval, it leaks out in tiny, almost invisible ways. Their laughter becomes forced. Their stories feel rehearsed. They try too hard, and the date feels off. They walk away wondering what went wrong, not realizing that their very attachment to a desired outcome was what sabotaged it. The same thing happens in job interviews, creative pursuits, negotiations, even daily conversations. When you're too focused on securing a specific outcome, your behavior becomes distorted. You lose fluidity. You stop adapting. You clutch. You grip. And reality senses the tension. People can feel it too. The human brain is deeply wired to detect subtle cues, tone of voice, micro-expressions, posture. We can feel when someone is trying too hard, and we instinctively distrust it. It's not about faking confidence. It's about releasing the need for control. But that's the hard part, isn't it? Because to truly let go, you must not only accept the possibility of failure, you must be okay with it. You must release your obsession with control. You must want something, but be at peace without it. Here's the paradox in its rawest form. The more you need something to happen, the more likely your behavior will repel it. But when you no longer need it, when you act from a place of centered presence, openness, and internal completeness, your odds of success increase. It feels cruel, it feels backwards, but it reveals a hidden truth, that desperation signals lack, and lack repels. Let's take another example. Picture two artists. One is driven purely by a love of the craft. They create because they must. They don't calculate every move, every stroke, every post on social media, hoping it goes viral. They are immersed in process, in flow, in expression. The second artist is obsessed with fame. Every piece they create is designed to attract attention, to manipulate the algorithm, to get likes. Guess who tends to succeed in the long term? It's often the first. Because their authenticity, their devotion to the process, resonates more deeply. And paradoxically, their lack of outcome dependence makes them more attractive to others. People are drawn to confidence that doesn't scream, "Please notice me." They're drawn to energy that doesn't beg, "Give me what I need." Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means detaching your identity from the result. You still want it, but it doesn't define you. You still try, but failure doesn't destroy you. You still act, but your worth isn't negotiated based on what happens next. This is not just spiritual advice. It's psychological truth. When your brain is overly outcome dependent, it enters a threat state. Cortisol rises. Anxiety increases. Your frontal cortex, the part responsible for creativity, decision-making, fluid thinking, gets hijacked. You become rigid, defensive, less yourself, less effective. But when you're calm, detached, and focused on the process, you enter a flow state. Your brain chemistry shifts. Dopamine spikes from the act itself, not just the result. And paradoxically, this increases your chances of getting what you originally wanted. Athletes know this well. The difference between choking and performing often comes down to mindset. If you're on the free throw line in a high-stakes game and you're obsessing over missing, you probably will. But if you can breathe, focus on the mechanics, the moment, the rhythm, you're more likely to succeed. Not because you don't care about the outcome, but because you're no longer owned by it. And still, we ask, how do we actually let go when we really, truly want something? Isn't that unnatural? Isn't that dishonest? Letting go isn't pretending not to care. It's creating an identity that is whole with or without the outcome. It's practicing the internal muscle of surrender, not passivity, but trust. Trust in your effort. Trust in your ability to adapt. Trust in something larger than your grip. And most importantly, trust that your value is not measured by what you gain. In Eastern philosophies, particularly in Zen and Taoist traditions, this is called non-attachment. Not indifference, but freedom from bondage to outcome. It means choosing the path because it aligns with your nature, not because it guarantees a reward. Outcome dependence whispers, "If I get it, I'll be enough." But freedom says, "I already am enough. That's why I pursue it." The paradox doesn't disappear. It remains. You want something. But to increase your chances, you must want it less. You must act without clinging. You must try without begging. You must speak without pleading to be heard. And maybe that's the most powerful form of mastery. To want with full heart. To try with full effort. But to be at peace, even if the result never arrives. Because in that peace, you become magnetic, free, undeniable, and sometimes, when you no longer need the door to open, it quietly swings wide on its own. The curiosity collapse, trap. Imagine craving an answer so badly that when you finally find it, you feel worse. Not relieved, just more tangled. The explanation only leads to more questions, more layers, more unknowns. This is the curiosity collapse trap, where the pursuit of knowledge doesn't quiet your mind. It feeds your anxiety. We've been taught that curiosity is a virtue, that seeking the truth will set you free. But what if it doesn't? What if the search for truth is just a more sophisticated way of running from silence, from the terror of not knowing, and the deeper terror that maybe there's nothing to know? It begins innocently. A thought, a mystery, a need to understand. You open a book. You ask a question. You search. But the first answer doesn't satisfy. It splits open new problems, new contradictions. Each insight multiplies your uncertainty, and you start to realize you're not solving a puzzle. You're building a labyrinth. This is why philosophy loops, why science never arrives, why the smartest people often look the most confused, because true curiosity doesn't end in clarity. It ends in complexity. And complexity is hard to live with. Psychologists have a name for part of this: cognitive closure. It's the human need to resolve ambiguity, to reach a stopping point. But curiosity has no stopping point. That's its beauty. And its curse. Because when the answers don't stop coming, your mind doesn't stop spinning. And here's the dark twist. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we pursue knowledge not to find peace, but to delay it. Because silence is unbearable. Because sitting in the unknown feels like death to the ego. So we fill the space with questions. But questions become habits, and habits become cages. The ancient Greeks knew this dilemma well. Socrates, often hailed as the wisest man in Athens, claimed to know nothing. Why? Because every answer he chased unraveled itself. Knowledge revealed the illusion of knowledge, and in that paradox he found humility, but not comfort. Modern thinkers echo this. The more we learn about the universe, the more we confront its impossibility. Quantum mechanics tells us particles are in multiple states until observed. Neuroscience tells us our brains don't record reality, they invent it. Psychology reveals that the self might be a story. So, what exactly are we learning, and who is doing the learning? Even in personal life, curiosity can collapse on itself. You want to understand why someone hurt you. So, you search through old messages, body language, memories. But the truth you find isn't clean, it's layered. They were insecure, or afraid, or projecting. And now you don't just feel hurt, you feel poisoned by their ghosts. The curiosity gave you depth, but stole your peace. This is the collapse point, where curiosity becomes compulsion. It's the late-night Googling that leads to doom spirals, the obsession with self-improvement that hides deep self-loathing, the endless questioning of meaning that never permits rest. We say we want the truth, but often we want something simpler, a shape to lean on, a conclusion, a soft edge, and the infinite recursion of curiosity denies us that. It becomes like hunger with no food, like thirst that water can't satisfy. So, what's the escape? Not ignorance, not apathy, but containment. To become someone who can hold questions without needing to eat them whole. To be curious without collapsing into obsession. This is where maturity lives. Not in answers, but in the ability to stop digging. Curiosity is a fire. Let it warm you. But if you climb into it, it will burn your shape away. The real courage is not in knowing more. It's in standing still in the storm of the unknown and choosing not to run. Because some mysteries aren't puzzles to solve. They're altars to bow to. Think of the child who keeps asking why. Not to annoy, but because their reality is still open. Every answer becomes a doorway. But eventually, they're told to stop. To accept. And something inside them closes. As adults, we reopen that door, but not always wisely. We binge documentaries. We spiral through conspiracy threads. We dissect our own minds. But this time, the wonder is mixed with dread, with the burden of interpretation, with the anxiety of control. And still, we keep searching for the perfect theory, the perfect diagnosis, the final piece that will complete the puzzle. But maybe there is no puzzle. Maybe life isn't something to figure out, but something to feel through. Maybe the need to know is less about truth and more about safety. To say, I know, is to create a wall. But walls can't grow. And growth happens where structure breaks, where maps fail, where curiosity meets surrender. So let yourself ask, but don't expect peace from the answer. Let yourself wonder, but don't confuse wondering with worth. And when your curiosity becomes a spiral, step out. Not because you failed to find the truth, but because you learned the truth might not need to be found. It might only need to be witnessed, and then released. Because not all questions have answers, and not all minds are meant to stay busy. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is breathe into the mystery and let it remain one. The peace invalidation reflex. You finally feel calm. A breath settles. The storm quiets. For a second, the noise stops, and it terrifies you. Because right behind that peace, your brain whispers, "Why do I feel okay?" And just like that, it's gone. This is the peace invalidation reflex, your mind's reflexive tendency to reject calm the moment it arrives. It doesn't trust it. It doesn't believe it. It interrogates it like a lie, and in doing so, it destroys it. It's not your fault. It's how you've been wired to survive. If your life has been shaped by chaos, unpredictability, or trauma, calm feels unfamiliar. And what's unfamiliar feels unsafe. Your nervous system has been trained to live on edge, ready to run, ready to fight, ready to break. Peace is not just a state, it's a threat to the systems that kept you alive. So, the moment it shows up, your mind starts scanning. Did I forget something? Is this avoidance? Am I numbing out? Even joy gets dissected. You feel happiness and then instantly worry. What if I lose this? The reflex kicks in. Peace becomes a crime scene, and you, the suspect. But here's the paradox. Peace is the very state your body needs to heal. And yet, the trauma-trained brain treats it like an ambush, like silence before an explosion. It's not lying to you. It's just outdated. It's still responding to ghosts. You've learned to associate discomfort with safety, because at least discomfort is predictable. Peace, on the other hand, is silent. And silence, to a brain conditioned by fear, is not peace. It's suspicious. So the body tenses. The mind spirals. You sabotage the stillness just to return to familiar suffering. Not because you want pain, but because you know how to survive it. Think about how many times you've ruined a calm evening by overthinking, or how quickly a moment of joy turned into anxiety. This isn't weakness, it's defense. When you live in survival mode long enough, safety starts to feel unsafe. It's a loop. Peace enters. The mind doubts. The body reacts. The peace disappears. And the absence of peace reinforces the belief that it was never real to begin with. This is the self-fulfilling design of invalidation. You never feel safe because you've trained yourself to expect danger inside safety itself. Even meditation becomes infected. You sit to relax, but your thoughts scream louder. You try to calm down, but the effort itself becomes pressure. You analyze your feelings, fearing you're doing peace wrong. And so, the mind rejects the very thing it longs for. But this reflex can be unlearned. Not by forcing peace, not by earning stillness, but by recognizing the reflex when it shows up and doing nothing. Just watching, breathing, letting it pass like a wave. The goal isn't to hold on to calm forever. It's to stop seeing its disappearance as a failure, because peace was real. You just didn't trust it. Sometimes, even the body resists calm. You lie down to rest, and suddenly, your chest tightens. Your thoughts quicken. Your heart races. Not because you're in danger, but because your system doesn't know how to relax. It's as if the body has forgotten the language of safety. Peace doesn't feel like home. It feels like absence. And absence feels like danger. This is especially true for people who've lived through emotional neglect or chronic unpredictability. If your nervous system was taught that love is chaotic, that attention is unstable, or that silence precedes violence, then peace isn't soothing, it's suspicious. You flinch at calm because calm was the moment just before the next storm. Even in relationships, the reflex appears. Someone treats you kindly, and your first thought isn't relief. It's doubt. What do they want? When will this change? You test their love, you push it, you break it just to see if it was ever real. Because validation feels unreal if your brain is addicted to proving it wrong. This doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're patterned. But patterns can shift. Slowly. Not by trying to fix the reflex, but by learning to see it without collapsing into it. Peace isn't a constant state. It's a moment. A window. And the reflex to invalidate it doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means you're healing. You can't force yourself to trust peace. But you can practice witnessing it, letting it exist for a second longer. Then a minute. Then, maybe an hour. Until one day, your brain forgets to doubt it. Until one day, silence doesn't feel like danger. It just feels quiet. That's how you rewire the reflex. By letting peace come and go without making it mean something. By not turning stillness into a problem to solve. By realizing that maybe peace doesn't have to be earned, fixed, explained, or justified. It just is. Like a wave that doesn't need your permission. And a breath that was never asking to be held. Maybe peace is not a destination. Maybe it's a visitor. One that knocks gently at the door, not to be seized, but welcomed. And every time you doubt it, it doesn't leave in anger. It waits just outside, patient, silent, eternal. Because peace is not fragile. It is simply unfamiliar. It does not need your belief to exist. Only your willingness to stop closing the door. And when you do, when you finally stop bracing for pain, when you stop dissecting joy, something opens. Not in the world, but in you. And that opening is not the end of the reflex, it's the beginning of trust. The perception dependency illusion. You think you see the world, but you don't. You see what your brain allows you to see, what it filters, what it edits, what it thinks you need to survive. The rest, it deletes. You are not looking through a window. You're looking through a keyhole, painted to look like a window. And you didn't even choose the paint. This is the perception dependency illusion, the belief that your senses offer truth. But the truth is, they offer only utility. Your eyes don't show you reality. They show you a reconstruction, an edited simulation optimized for speed, not accuracy. Colors? They don't exist outside your brain. Sound? Just vibrations until interpreted. Time? Not a river, just your brain stitching frames into a loop that feels like flow. You think you're perceiving what is, but you're actually perceiving what's useful. And what's useful depends on what keeps you alive. That's why your brain hides the blur in your peripheral vision, why it fills in blind spots with invented detail, why it discards 99% of incoming information. Because the raw world is overwhelming. Too much data, too much randomness, too much noise. So your brain compresses it, stylizes it, narrates it, until perception becomes a tool, not a mirror. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as your brain wants you to see it, so you don't freeze, panic, or get eaten. Survival isn't about truth, it's about predictability. So, when you look at a stranger's face, you don't actually see them, you see your brain's story about them. Based on past experience, familiar features, subconscious bias, cultural pattern recognition, and you believe that story, because it comes faster than thought. But it's not truth, it's compression. This is why two people can witness the same event and remember entirely different things, because their brains filtered the data differently. Each one edited the world based on what they needed to feel safe, right, or in control. And now here's the terrifying part. You've never truly seen anything clearly. Not yourself, not others, not even the moment you're living right now. Because perception is not a passive lens. It's a survival strategy. And survival doesn't care about objectivity. It cares about what works. It lets you see beauty when you fall in love. It lets you ignore red flags to avoid loss. It sharpens time when you're in danger, and stretches it when you're bored. It paints meaning onto random events. It turns patterns into signs, symbols into fate, emotion into truth. But it's all a trick. Not malicious, just mechanical. A function of evolution. So what does that mean for your identity? If you've never seen clearly, how can you know yourself? If your perception is this unreliable, what happens when you finally stop trusting your own eyes, your own thoughts, your own instincts? What's left? Awareness. The part of you that notices the illusion. That questions the keyhole. That says, wait, what if I'm wrong? That is the beginning of real vision. Not what you're shown, but the fact that you can observe the showing, that you can turn your gaze inward. Not to find clarity, but to find humility, to admit you are blind. And in that blindness, begin to see the invisible structure shaping what you call truth. Perception isn't reality. It's a translation. And once you accept that, the world shifts. Not because the illusion fades, but because you stop mistaking it for fact. You stop clinging. You start watching. Not with judgment, not with fear, but with presence. You stop seeing to survive and start observing to awaken. And in that space, something honest begins to flicker. Not the raw world, not the ultimate truth, but the first clear glimpse of what you are beneath the filters, an observer in a sea of stories, a witness to your own mind's limitations, a consciousness peering through a lens you didn't build, finally aware that it is a lens. The Wisdom-Vanity Inversion. You've probably met them, the people who speak with unshakable certainty. Every topic, every opinion, every answer sounds final, bulletproof, beyond question. And maybe for a moment you're tempted to trust them, because confidence looks like knowledge. But what if it's not? What if the very certainty they wield is proof of their ignorance? This is the heart of the Wisdom-Vanity Inversion. It's a psychological, emotional, and philosophical trap. The idea that the more a person believes they are wise, the less likely it is to be true. And the more doubt someone carries about their own knowledge, the more cautious, measured, and questioning they are, the closer they might be to real wisdom. It seems backward, but only at first. Imagine a small island of knowledge floating in a vast ocean of the unknown. When you know very little, your island is small, and so is its shoreline, its edge. You barely see how much you don't know. You think the world is simple because your understanding is small, but as you learn more, your island grows, and with it, so does the shoreline, the boundary between what you know and what you don't. You begin to sense just how infinite that ocean is. The wisest people are the ones most aware of what they don't know. That awareness becomes humility, and that humility becomes wisdom. But vanity is different. Vanity builds castles on tiny islands. It pretends the unknown doesn't exist. It mistakes clarity for completeness. It takes partial understanding and inflates it into absolute truth. Vanity is loud, confident, and often wrong. Wisdom is quiet, uncertain, and terrifyingly aware of how little it knows. This is why true experts are filled with disclaimers and nuance. It depends. We're still researching. There's much we don't understand. Meanwhile, those who know the least offer the boldest answers. Trust me, it's obvious. I know how the world works. Think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where people with low ability at a task overestimate their competence. But this goes deeper than just skill. This is about being, about identity, about how some people define themselves through illusion. The illusion of certainty, the illusion of wisdom. You see it in spiritual circles where someone claims enlightenment, yet lacks even the basic empathy to listen. You see it in politics, where self-declared truth-tellers refuse to entertain any idea that threatens their self-image. You see it in daily life, people who talk more than they listen, people who argue not to learn, but to win. And yet, the real thinkers, the real sages, they hesitate. They question their assumptions. They revisit their beliefs. They look inward and ask, am I missing something? Because wisdom isn't about having answers. It's about asking better questions. Now, here's where the inversion becomes even more brutal. The moment you start feeling wise, you begin to drift toward vanity. The very awareness that you're becoming wise is itself a trap. Because wisdom cannot be claimed. It is never finished. It is only practiced quietly, privately, often painfully. And the moment you think, I know what I'm doing, the trap tightens. You stop learning, you stop listening, you stop evolving. And now, you're not wise anymore. You're just another voice pretending to be a lighthouse in a storm. Real wisdom is raw. It's vulnerable. It doesn't feel like power. It feels like humility, like standing on the edge of an abyss and realizing how deep it goes. It's the scientist who says, we've made progress, but we may never know the full answer. It's the teacher who admits, I learn as much from my students as they do from me. It's the parent who tells their child, I don't always know what's best, but I will try my best. That's wisdom, and it often comes cloaked in uncertainty. So what do we do with this inversion? How do we live inside it without falling? The answer is brutal and beautiful. Stay uncomfortable. Stay skeptical of your own conclusions. Stay alert to the ego's desire to feel wise. Never confuse insight with completion. Never confuse clarity with finality. Stay in motion. Stay in reflection. And most of all, be afraid of your own certainty. If something feels too easy, too final, too self-congratulatory, it probably is. That's not wisdom. That's vanity in disguise. Let's look at an example. A 25-year-old reads 5 books on philosophy and suddenly believes they understand the meaning of life. They quote Nietzsche. They use words like existentialism and absurdism. They feel superior to others, but they haven't lived, haven't suffered, haven't doubted themselves deeply enough. Now picture a 70-year-old who has spent decades wrestling with loss, with love, with the mystery of death. They say very little, but when they do speak, it hits like a bell in a quiet room, because their wisdom comes not from answers, but from surviving the questions. This is the inversion, the illusion that loudness is truth, that confidence equals competence, that speaking is thinking, but real wisdom often looks like silence. So, next time you feel certain, pause, question it, ask yourself, what might I be missing? Not to undermine yourself, but to protect yourself. Because once you stop questioning, you stop growing. The Wisdom-Vanity Inversion is not just a psychological observation, it's a spiritual warning. A mirror you must face again and again. Every time you feel like you've reached the top of the mountain, look around. That might not be a summit. It might be a pedestal your ego built. The truth is, no one arrives at wisdom. You don't get there and stay there. You touch it, briefly, and then life humbles you again. You're forced to relearn, reconsider, re-see. And that is the mark of the truly wise. Not the answers they give, but the questions they never stop asking. The final question loop. You've asked it before, in the quiet, in the chaos, in the stillness between heartbeats. You've asked it without moving your lips, without making a sound, but the echo still rattles the walls of your mind. The question, the one you never say out loud because some part of you already knows. There is no answer. And yet, you ask. You ask it again, and again, and again. Not because you expect a different response, but because some stubborn, shivering corner of your soul hopes that this time, the silence might answer back. This is the final question loop, a spiral of thought, a whisper that keeps returning no matter how far you run from it. It's not just a question, it's a doorway. And once opened, it never closes, because it's not curiosity that keeps it alive. It's longing, it's fear, it's the desperate need for certainty in a universe that never promised any. What's the question? It's different for everyone. For some, it's, why did they leave? For others, it's, what's wrong with me? Or, what if I had done it differently? Or, am I real? Or, what's the point? But the question itself is not the danger. It's the loop, the way it haunts, the way it waits in the corners of your joy, in the pauses between distractions, in the silence just before sleep. You might forget about it for a day, a week, even a year, but it never forgets about you, because once a question has no answer, it becomes eternal. Think of a mind trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. It becomes obsessed, addicted, not to the solution, but to the chase. Because giving up means accepting uncertainty. And the human mind, wired for patterns, for meaning, for resolution, hates uncertainty more than pain. That's the trap. A breakup that never made sense. A childhood scar that never healed. A death that came too early. A betrayal that rewired your trust. The brain wants to understand, because understanding feels like control, like closure, like safety. So it loops. Not because it's broken, but because it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from the unknown. It believes that if it just replays it one more time, thinks it through one more angle, asks one more what if, the riddle will unravel, the ache will stop, the answer will come. But it doesn't. It never does. And here's the paradox. The only way to escape the loop is to stop asking. But to stop asking feels like surrender, like losing, like giving up the only thread that ties you to the meaning you once believed existed. That's what makes it so hard. You're not just chasing an answer. You're chasing a version of yourself that could have known, that should have known. You're trying to return to the moment before the question began. But time only moves one way. And so, you sit with the question again. Sometimes at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling. Sometimes while pretending to laugh in public. Sometimes mid-sentence, mid-song, mid-smile, and it drips into your consciousness like a drop of ink into water. You don't even notice it at first, but suddenly, everything feels off, distant, tainted. And there it is again, that question, and you whisper it. To no one. To the void. To the part of you that still believes in closure. But the silence remains silent. So why do we keep asking? Because humans are story-driven creatures. We crave resolution. Not just in novels or movies, but in life. We want the clean ending, the final page, the clear answer. But reality doesn't follow scripts. It doesn't hand out epilogues. Sometimes the story just ends, or vanishes, or leaves you hanging in midair, waiting for a punchline that never lands, and the brain can't accept that. So it loops and loops and loops. It's a strange kind of pain, not sharp but persistent, not loud but consuming. The ache of something unfinished, the torment of a door that refuses to shut. And sometimes we grow to depend on the loop. It becomes a part of our identity. The question is not just something we ask, it's something we are. Because if we stop asking, who are we without it? Letting go feels like betrayal, like burying something sacred, like forgetting the one thing that mattered most. But here's the truth hidden in the shadows. Not every question was meant to be answered. Some questions were meant to be felt, held, grieved. Because sometimes the only real answer is presence, not knowing why, but sitting with the fact that you may never know, and slowly, learning to be okay with that. It's not easy. It never will be. But freedom doesn't come from solving the question. It comes from no longer needing to. It comes from accepting that the universe doesn't owe us clarity, that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because they're cruel, but because they're too large for language, too raw for logic, too sacred for words. So maybe it's okay to stop asking. Maybe it's okay to stand in the silence and just breathe. And maybe, just maybe, when you finally stop waiting for the answer, the loop begins to loosen its grip. And the question? It might still be there, but it will no longer define you. It will no longer own you. And that is the real answer.